Hello curious people, today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable now. I stepped into the stories. My name is Eric Saunders, and if you're reading this, you still have a chance to stop it. I'm writing this for you, the people of this time, because in my world, there's no one left to listen. I come from the year 2049, and I've seen the end of everything. You've noticed the drones in your skies, haven't you? Small lights, silent, and perfect, moving in formations too precise to be random. The news dismisses them. Experimental tech, civilian drones, a prank. Maybe you believe that. Maybe you think the government has it under control. I'm here to tell you they don't. Those aren't drones. They're scouts, probes. Something far worse than you can imagine is hiding beneath the waves, and those lights are the first sign of what's coming. In my time, they emerged, machines and creatures we were never meant to see. They didn't come to make contact. They came to feed. Cities burned. Millions died. And now, even after all this, I can still hear their hum, vibrating in my bones. It's in the energy grid, in the sky, in the earth itself. You don't believe me. I get it. I wouldn't have believed me either. But listen closely. By the time you see what I've seen, it will already be too late. It started in December of 2024, in the skies over New Jersey. People spotted lights, silent clusters hovering in perfect grids. At first, it was small, maybe 10 or 12 over the Pine Barrens. Someone posted a blurry video online with the caption, "New Jersey UFOs." It went viral, of course, but the experts quickly dismissed it. Drones, they said. FAA tests, experimental aircraft. But then the sightings spread. The lights moved over coastal towns, over neighborhoods in Newark and Jersey City, and then out toward the Atlantic Ocean. People gathered in their backyards, pointing at the sky, snapping photos. The lights weren't random. They were methodical, scanning, like machines studying a map. I watched it all unfold on my phone. The videos getting clearer every day. You could see their precision, how the lights would align and move in formation, gliding across the rooftops, the trees, the streets. And still, no one took it seriously. It's a hoax. Just drones. The government's up to something. The lights were over the ocean by Christmas Eve. They lingered there for days, floating in the fog like stars that had fallen too low. Then, just as suddenly, they disappeared. People moved on. The drones had done their job. It was the 4th of July, the night of fireworks, parades, backyard barbecues. I remember standing on my roof in Hoboken, watching the colorful explosions light up the sky over Manhattan. That's when I saw them again. The lights. This time there were hundreds, hovering just beyond the fireworks. They looked like stars, glowing white and faintly blue, but they moved, shifting into patterns like a swarm of insects. People below me noticed them too. I could hear the murmurs rising in the crowd. What is that? Are those planes? Then the lights started to descend. I'll never forget the sound, the sudden, deafening hum that rose out of nowhere, vibrating through my bones. It was like 1,000 engines coming to life all at once. The lights folded and shifted, their glowing outlines collapsing into jagged metallic shapes. They weren't drones. They were machines. The first explosion hit Newark, a flash of light and a fireball that swallowed an entire block. The shockwave rattled windows in Hoboken. Then Jersey City, 3 quick bursts in the dark, buildings collapsing in on themselves like sandcastles kicked over by a child. People screamed. I dropped to my knees, staring at the skyline as something enormous emerged from the water. At first, I thought it was a ship, but it kept rising. Black, chitinous, and alive, its surface pulsing with sickly violet light. Its eyes, clusters of orbs that burned like stars, turned toward the shore, and I swear they saw us. New York was next, and then the rest of the world. Over the next 48 hours, New Jersey was wiped off the map. The machines poured out of the ocean in waves, some towering like skyscrapers, others small and spider-like, skittering through the streets and tearing through buildings. People tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Highways were jammed with cars that never moved again. Airports were flattened. The military responded with fighter jets, tanks, missiles, everything they had. None of it mattered. I saw it firsthand. A fighter jet fired a missile straight at one of the creatures in downtown Jersey City. The explosion hit, but the thing didn't even flinch. It absorbed the energy, its surface rippling like water. Then it turned, and with a single pulse of light, the jet dropped out of the sky. The machines were feeding. They latched onto power lines, substations, and entire skyscrapers, draining them dry. The lights went out one block at a time, cities falling into darkness. The hum of the machines grew louder with each passing hour, like the world itself was vibrating. By the time 2030 arrived, humanity was broken. The machines had spread across the globe, stripping cities for resources and turning the planet into a wasteland. Entire continents were swallowed by the creatures, oceans blackened, forests burned to ash. The survivors, what few of us remained, fled underground. That's where we lived for years, hiding in bunkers, afraid to make a sound. The surface was theirs now. The machines patrolled endlessly, and you could still hear the hum vibrating through the earth, a constant reminder that we weren't alone. Some of the survivors whispered that the machines weren't just feeding on energy. They were learning, adapting. They were alive, but not like us. Their minds were vast, collective, and ancient. We'd woken something that had been asleep for millennia, buried in the ocean's deepest trenches. In 2045, deep in an underground lab, while digging deeper and deeper for more resources to survive, we found it. An ancient machine hidden far beneath the crust of the earth. It wasn't ours. Human hands had never built something so complex. Some said it had been left there by the same beings that had sent the machines. Others believed it belonged to a civilization long before us, one that had faced the same fate. The machine bent time. A door, not a weapon. It was our last chance. Me and a couple of others volunteered to go back to your time, to the year 2024, to warn you before it starts. We tried everything to warn them, the government, the military, anyone who would listen. But every time one of us spoke out, they were silenced, arrested. The FBI, the CIA, agencies that once served the people, became the tools to keep the truth buried. Those of us who knew too much vanished overnight, labeled as threats or lunatics. I'm the last one left, and there's no one left to trust. No way to spread the warning except this message. If you're reading this, you deserve to know the truth. The drones, the lights, they're not what they say they are. You're running out of time. Those drones you see now, they're the beginning. The scouts. The machines are waking up, mapping your cities, learning your defenses. They're hiding in the Atlantic Ocean, waiting for the right moment to rise. The government won't save you. They don't understand what's coming, and when they do, it will already be too late. Don't listen to the news. Don't trust their explanations. When you see the lights in the sky, when you hear that hum vibrating through your bones, you need to act. Destroy them. Drive them back. Do whatever it takes. Because once they rise, the world as you know it will end. I didn't escape them. Even now, I hear the hum. It's in the air, in the ground, in me. You still have time. Don't let it run out. Beware of crying infants in empty theaters. I know what you're thinking. That kind of warning is probably meant to sell seats. Charge extra for ghost tours. That's what my boss told me to do when we first started having this problem. Things escalated quickly from just the occasional complaint after about 3 weeks. That was when someone claimed the person they came to the movies with had simply disappeared. We chalked it up to just a few moviegoers wanting to pull a prank, or maybe couples having problems and leaving their exes high and dry during a bad cinematic experience. I guess I didn't really think it was real until we found the blood dripping from a theater seat last week. It looked like someone had been sitting there enjoying their popcorn 1 minute, and the next had been brutally chewed up like jerky. It was just after a matinee show. My best friend Wade was on cleanup duty and shouted loud enough for me to hear in the women's stall next door. I ran in there, thinking maybe he had found another homeless person passed out, and instead discovered what looked like a putrid pile of guts and loose hair and bone. Wade and I both did our best to hold back the nausea we felt, and I told him that I would call the shift manager Joey so we could figure out what to do about this. Joey was not as easily upset about the situation as us, because he was convinced it was just some crazy prank. There's no way anyone could have been murdered in here. It was during a normal viewing, right? So that means there must have been at least 50 people in the audience. Look at where this happened. Most of them would be in rows above the mess. So how could that have occurred when there were so many eyewitnesses? He told Wade and I to stop being babies and clean it up, or he would tell the theater owner. When he left, my friend and I were still uneasy about the grotesque scene, but part of what Joey said made sense. I've worked in haunted houses before. The stuff they do to the models in there is pretty convincing. I told Wade as I grabbed some gloves and pushed my cart next to his. I also knew that Joey expected us to move fast. The next movie would be premiering in 15 minutes. So despite how awful it made us feel or how eerie the entire cinema felt, we had to get the job done. We didn't talk during the cleanup. Just grabbed the loose organs and tossed them into bags like they were Coke cans. I convinced myself it had to be just par for the course like Joey said, and I put it out of my mind when it was all said and done. Then it happened again. And this time, a moviegoer claimed they heard strange noises in the theater right before we went in for cleanup. I think there is one guy still in there, watching the end credits, they told me. Both of us talked about the noises that others had claimed to have heard as we entered the vacant cinema. On the screen we saw that the final credits had played, and that typically meant the lights would go up inside the room. But this time they went out entirely. Wade froze as we got to the steps, and he remarked, "Austin, I swear I saw something move on row K." I took out my flashlight, feeling my heart beat a little faster as I told him to calm down. I focused the beam of light on the row he mentioned, not seeing a thing. "Your eyes are playing tricks with you. Go get the lighting working and I'll start at the top," I told him. Wade left, and I slowly walked up the theater steps. I've worked here for a few years and was used to being in these cinemas alone, but this time felt very different, especially because of the total darkness. I was about midway up the steps when I heard the strangest noise. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A baby crying. The rumors were real. I stopped where I was and kept the flashlight close to me, trying to not freak out. "Wade, that better not be you trying to scare me." I shouted toward the noise. It was distant, somewhere on the other side of the auditorium. But as I stood there and moved the flashlight across the empty seats, I noticed the crying became more incessant. Then I saw a silhouette of someone sitting near the middle of the cinema, row M, and it nearly made my heart skip a beat. They were sitting very still, almost motionless in the recliner like they had fallen asleep. Except I saw there was something else there, hunched on top of the stranger's shoulders with its head twisted down, and its mouth right against a cavity in the man's head. As I let the flashlight linger over top of the slumped shoulders of the moviegoer, I saw the creature was no longer than a small child, its legs bent backwards and its toes digging into the theater seat as it passively ate the man's innards from his skull like they were soup. It had no hair or skin color, just a long bony body and misshapen head resembling that of a goblin shark. I heard it make short work of the victim, tearing him apart with no regard for the mess as it snarled and then turned its putrid gaze to me. It shrieked, angered by the light, and I swear to you it sounded like the squeal of a newborn. I dropped the light in an instant, and it ran off into the shadows, leaving behind the husk of the unfortunate man still covered in blood and drool like a discarded piñata. Wade returned moments later as the electrical problems were fixed and saw me standing there, stiff as a statue staring at the body, too mortified by the last few minutes to move or speak. I didn't have to though. The gruesome carnage spoke for itself. So we closed off that cinema and called the police right away. Joey insisted I avoid mentioning anything about a feral beast child running amok, so the cops only thought they had a homicide to investigate. What's the plan to catch this thing? If we don't do something, more bodies will start piling up, and we'll be out of business, Joey asked. I didn't even want to fathom being near it again. You didn't see what I saw. It broke that man's neck like it was nothing and moved faster than lightning. The fucking thing was a demon. Maybe so, Joey conceded as he stared down at the roped-off cinema. But it still must be mortal. Those cops found traces of skin and saliva that didn't belong to the victim. That must mean this beastie boy is living within the walls of this theater somewhere. Great. Guess that explains the crying we've been hearing these past few weeks. It must be getting hungrier, must be why it's resorting to these vicious killings. Joey had a glint in his eye. An idea had formed of what we would do next. If it's taking bigger risks, then that means we need to do the same and starve it. We'll close the entire theater for a week and then lure it into a cinema and catch it. It will be so blinded by hunger that it won't see the trap, Joey decided. To do something like that, we would need to find live bait. The creature has been attacking lone moviegoers near the end of the films. Stands to reason even in desperation it would match that pattern, Wade suggested as he returned from finishing his statement with the police. Sounds like you would be just the man for the job, our boss said, patting Wade on the back. Once we catch it, what are you planning to do with it? I asked, not even daring to think of the bizarre plan for the trap he had in mind. Wade's life was at risk, or worse. It could be that none of this went as planned, and the feral child left the theater without a second thought. Joey smiled, promising us glory and fame if we did as he said. It was an alluring prospect. To catch something like this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Somehow he persuaded us. Or maybe deep down we wanted it and thought we had a shot at getting that limelight. Either way, Joey called the theater owner to explain the need for shutting down the entire building for a week just to get rid of the bad stench from the dead body. Not wanting any more bad press, they agreed to it. And we prepared for the next encounter with the feral child. The week honestly went by too quickly for me. Every day Joey would gather supplies or call me to make sure I wasn't backing out. And I know what you are thinking because I thought about it too. Why was I not backing out? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that crazy feral beast crawling over that poor man's body like praying mantis. I knew it could easily kill us the moment we were alone with it again. And after a week of no food, it would be even more deadly. But Wade didn't want to back down. He was stoked to meet this monster and was convinced Joey's plan was going to work. We've got automatic weapons, a cage strong enough to hold the lion. And if things go wrong, we've got you to come in with the grenade and save the day. I didn't like the idea of being the one to hold such a dangerous explosive, but my friends were not going to be talked out of this crazy plan. So I just nodded and listened, the panic and dread growing in me with each passing moment. You ever see a car crash? It all happens so fast, and yet as you replay it in your head, you see every little detail. This was the same way. I knew where this was heading, and there was nothing that could stop it either. When the time came, I was told to be up in the film booth to work the projector. We would play a short film and pretend that work was returning to normal. When we walked into the cinema, though, I immediately felt uneasy. I was expecting more destruction, because if the child was cornered and searching for food, surely it would have turned over every nook and cranny to find some. So why was the building seemingly untouched? Had it moved to greener pastures in the week we were gone? It's still here. Unsure of it, Joey said as he got Wade in place near the middle of the cinema, and then gave me the hand signal to start the film. The movie played, and I watched as intently as I could. I was supposed to give a warning the moment something went wrong. As I sat there in the small reel studio, I couldn't help but think this was my passion as well. I was vulnerable because I was so focused on wanting this I didn't consider that I could be a target. Then a small droplet of spit fell onto my shoulder. I dared to look up, my knees buckling as I saw two wide slit eyes, filled with pure hate, staring down at me. It had the face of a woman, ragged jet black hair with pale skin and parched lips. From the neck down, though, all I saw was a monstrosity. With enough legs, arms, and sagging tits to resemble a human centipede, the creature slowly crawled from the ceiling to the ground in front of the projector. It stood to its full height, hunching over in the tall room to make it clear how large it was. With its back legs cracking and bending in impossible directions, it crushed the projector and moved toward me, pinning me into a corner before I even had a chance to react. I closed my mouth, trying hard to not scream, while the creature opened its own, and a forked barbed tongue slowly edged its way out and moved along my cheek. The prickly texture ripped at my skin, the way a razor might cut you for an early morning shave. This beast was preparing to kill and eat me, but first it wanted to play with me first. I closed my eyes, the spit from its mouth oozing against my scalp as I shook and whimpered. From behind, I heard a voice. Joey. He was standing there at the back entrance to the projector room, and he had something next to him. It took a moment in the new darkness of the theater to see it clearly. Wade's crazy plan had worked. The smaller hunched baby was in Joey's arms, screaming for its mother. Suddenly, eating me was forgotten, and the centipede woman rushed toward Joey like a freight train. Joey slammed the door shut, and I heard the wails of the smaller beast echo loudly as he ran to the open theater. The mother gave a banshee cry in response, moving to the window where the projector had once emitted its pictures onto the big screen. It began to hit the glass, frantic to reach its young. I slumped down to my hands and knees, crawling over to the other exit while it was distracted. I didn't even dare to look back as I made it into the fire stairs. Then I started to look for a weapon that could potentially finish the monster off. Joey and Wade were waiting in the cinema as I rushed in, both of them watching frantically for the mother to break through, and Joey told us both to remain perfectly still. The trap would work, he promised. He was sure of it. We stood perfectly still and looked toward the window, sure the mother would burst through a few more seconds. But the cinema was deathly silent, and I noticed even the young infant creature was quiet. Something was wrong. A strange clattering noise resounded, and Joey looked about frantically, trying to determine where it came from. It's using the floor vents to move around, I realized as I heard the noise echo near us. There was no way to be sure where it might strike. Joey took a step back, looking toward the vent nearest to us. Then all of us watched in amazement as the centipede woman pushed the grating up and lunged. It struck Joey first, allowing the child to worm free as its barbed tongue jabbed his right eye. I pulled Wade from where he stood and demanded he give me the weapon he was supposed to have brought. He passed me the small fire axe, and I swung at the back of the woman, trying to fend her off before she killed Joey. The younger creature shrieked and bounded toward me when it heard its mother in pain. With the axe as my only defense, I swung at the young beast and lopped its head off with one swift stroke. This sent the mother into a frenzy. She tossed Joey across the room like he was a rag doll, and then flung chairs toward my head. The blind rage was the only thing saving me from being killed, and I used it to run and hide. For some reason, I thought Wade would be smart enough to follow me. Instead, when I looked back, I saw he had found one of the chairs that the mother had ripped from our cinema and hurled it back at her. All that did was enrage her even more. Its serpentine body wrapped around Wade, and I heard his bones break as the monster constricted his life away. Long ivory fangs extended from the woman's mouth, and her jaw collapsed down to allow her to bite on his head as his eyes widened with absolute fear. All I could do was watch as the snake woman enclosed her throat over my friend. Somehow I snapped out of the sheer terror, and before I knew it, I was at her back with the axe again. I slammed it into her jagged spine a dozen times. The creature moaned and shook, refusing to release Wade. So I did what I knew my friend would have wanted, and instead ended his life right where the snake's head was at. Her grip tightened, and her body reeled back as she took Wade's head right where I had severed it. His spine scattered across the cinema with muscle and sinew raining down. Then the beast recoiled and crawled toward another vent. Somehow I knew if it escaped that it would return, but I was so transfixed on the broken body of my friend I could not stop him. The centipede lady pushed her body into a vent and then was out of sight before I could even try to get a few more good hits in. I kept looking at where Wade's neck now bled out on the brown carpet, disturbed not only because of what I had been forced to do, but also by what was lodged there amid his tissue and organs. They looked like millions of tiny bugs or tadpoles, if I'm being more precise, eating away at his corpse like it was a fresh kill. Something told me those bugs were more than just an afterthought. The serpent had attempted to implant Wade's corpse with a new batch of infant creatures. I shuddered and swung the axe against the body several more times just to be sure her infectious young had nothing to feed on anymore. I went to find Joey next. He was hardly breathing, laying my next to a pile of debris and offering me a camera. All the proof we need. In there. Call someone, he begged. I told him the only ones I would call were 911, but he insisted we couldn't do that. The cinema would be closed down. I didn't care. Once he passed out, I made the call and then pulled him out of the cinema. He was unconscious when paramedics arrived, and my theater manager was there as well, demanding answers for all of the damage. I considered offering the camera as proof, but thought twice. Would he attempt to pursue this monster like Joey had? No more people could die. My reluctance to answer, however, was seen as negligence, and I was fired. I took that as the chance to tell the truth about the monster and what it had done. It's all here, I insisted, prepared to give over the footage. He swatted it out of my hand and then smashed it to bits. Utter nonsense. You best be glad that the police left, or I would be having you locked up as well. I looked at the destroyed footage. My hopes of Wade and Joey's sacrifice not being in vain were gone in mere seconds. I walked out, fists trembling. That was a few weeks ago. I have tried forgetting the whole ordeal, but circumstances don't let me forget. The manager closed the theater due to the overwhelming debt from the repairs. They demolished it a week ago, and there were no signs of the centipede woman except strange shreds of skin found in some of the old vents. I knew that meant she had shed her husk and healed, moving to a new feeding ground. This is why I now hear its clattering in the night, or hear its wails in my restless sleep. I know it will search for me and find me, for all that I did to it. Maybe I deserve it for even surviving. The whole experience has taught me I know nothing of our natural world, and that there are darknesses best left unexplored. I pass that knowledge on to others now who spread rumors of their own, be they a serpent or a rat or something else. I remind them that sometimes when you whisper about what lurks in the shadows, sometimes something whispers back. Something is not right with my wife. People called me a genius. The media said I was brilliant, a pioneer, a titan, or the industry. I graced the covers of magazines with headlines that screamed, "Visionary CEO disrupts tech world," or "The mind of a modern genius." The cameras loved me, and the world drank up every polished word I delivered in interviews. My life was bulletproof, my empire sprawling. It was easy to hide. Suits tailored to perfection, grins sharpened to charm boardrooms and TED Talk audiences, a steady hand when I held a microphone. But something about the applause always rang hollow in my ears, as though the sound was coming from somewhere far away. The first crack in the facade appeared with Vivian, my wife. For 10 years, she'd been the constant amid chaos. Viv was the calm in every hurricane, her laughter a balm, her gaze steady even when I fell into my darker moods. We'd met in college, a spilled coffee turning into love. She didn't marry me for success or wealth. She loved me, the version of myself I barely recognized anymore. Or at least she had. I noticed it on a Tuesday, a day so inconsequential it should have evaporated from my memory like smoke. She was slicing lemons in the kitchen, the knife moving rhythmically. I walked in, still clutching my briefcase, and froze. Her hands weren't right. Vivian had delicate hands, hands that curved when she rested them on her cheek, hands that wrote letters in soft, sloping script. But these hands, her hands, were slightly different. The fingers seemed longer, the skin paler, like they belonged to a wax model of her. She looked up at me and smiled. "Rough day?" she asked, as though nothing was wrong. It was her voice, her face, her everything. But my gut turned. My mouth went dry. "Yeah," I said after a pause, setting my briefcase down carefully. I forced myself to meet her eyes. Light hazel, same as always. But there was something behind them. Something too smooth and placid, like the glass surface of a pond hiding something dark and writhing beneath. "You look pale," she said, stepping toward me. Her voice was honeyed, comforting, luring. I flinched before I could stop myself. "I'm fine," I said quickly. Her smile lingered for just a moment too long before she turned back to the lemons, the knife continuing its steady rhythm. The scrape of metal on wood drilled into my skull like a heartbeat. I chalked it up to exhaustion. That was logical, explainable. I was in the middle of developing the most ambitious AI platform of my career, one that had the board foaming at the mouth. 36-hour workdays were my norm. Sleep was a luxury, and sanity was a flexible concept. But after that night, I couldn't stop seeing it, the wrongness. Her laughter came a beat too late, too rehearsed. When she tucked her long dark hair behind her ear, it was too perfect, like she'd practiced it in a mirror. The way she folded laundry, neat, mechanical, wasn't how Vivian used to do it. It was subtle, maddening in its smallness, but it was there. The mirrors were next. I had always been indifferent to mirrors, saw them as tools, reflections of fact. But now, when I looked into one, the truth bent and twisted. One night, I stood in my office, pacing in front of the tall window that overlooked the city. I caught my reflection in the glass and froze. My reflection wasn't moving. It stood there, still as a photograph, staring back at me. Its mouth began to curl into a smile. My mouth. Only it stretched too far, too wide, as though someone were pulling it from the corners. I turned away, my breath hitching, and when I looked back, it was normal again. My reflection, hollow-eyed, a little disheveled. That was when I stopped trusting the world around me. I began studying Vivian, quietly, meticulously. I asked questions only she would know the answers to, but they were too simple, too obvious. She passed them all, but too well. "Remember Florence?" I said casually over dinner one night. "You cried when we saw the Duomo." She smiled fondly. I did. But what did we fight about? The faintest flicker of hesitation crossed her face before she smoothed it over. We didn't fight, Jacob. It was perfect. But we had fought. I'd forgotten her birthday during that trip, too busy fielding calls from investors. She stormed off to a cafe for hours while I panicked, thinking I'd lost her. That memory was burned into my brain, as sharp as a blade. I stared at her across the table, my hands trembling beneath the wood. She just smiled, that placid, artificial smile, and sipped her wine. I found the photographs a week later. I had come home early, too early, and the house was quiet. I walked into her office to grab something and noticed the bottom drawer was slightly ajar. Inside was a folder. It was thick, heavy. I opened it and froze. Photographs. Hundreds of them. All of me. Me at work, talking to my assistant. Me pacing in my office. Me sleeping, my mouth slightly open on my pillow. Me brushing my teeth in the bathroom mirror. They were taken at odd angles, through windows, cracks, and doors. At the bottom of the pile was a list of names. My name was at the top, circled in red. I heard the front door creak open, and I shoved the folder back into the drawer. My pulse hammered as I stumbled back to the kitchen, forcing a smile. "Jacob," she called, "you're home early." Her voice echoed through the hallway, but all I could hear was the blood roaring in my ears. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to her, staring at the ceiling, feeling her presence beside me like a storm cloud. Around 3 a.m., she moved, slowly, deliberately. I watched her silhouette rise and stand at the foot of the bed. "Jacob," she said softly, "why don't you sleep anymore?" My throat felt raw, my hands clammy. "You're not real," I whispered. Her head tilted. Even in the dark, I could see the shadow of a smile stretch across her face. "You're so tired, love. You're seeing things." I bolted upright, my hand gripping the knife I kept under the pillow. "What are you?" I hissed. "I'm your wife," she said. "I always have been." I lunged, the knife flashing in the dark. Her scream pierced the room, so raw, so real, it stopped me mid-motion. My hand shook as the light flicked on. Blood smeared my fingers, and Vivian lay crumpled on the carpet, her eyes wide, her lips quivering. I saw it then, in the mirror across the room. In the reflection, there was no knife. There was no blood. It was just me, kneeling on the floor, cradling her body like a child's doll, rocking back and forth, whispering her name. When they found me, I was alone in the room, staring into the mirror. The doctors said, I snapped, that Vivian had died months ago in a car accident that I caused. They said my mind broke under the weight of guilt, that I created imposters and monsters to protect myself. But even now, as I sit in this stark white room, my wrists bound, I still see her in the reflections. She smiles at me, tilts her head, and I smile back. Fuck, hey, idea. My new patient is a spider. In the summer of 2018, officers from several local law enforcement agencies attended a SWAT training exercise at the shuttered East Hills Mall in Bakersfield, California. Approximately 2 hours into the training, 2 of the officers vanished. They responded to nothing, not even to radio calls. The remaining participants searched the mall, assuming it was part of the exercise. 3 full sweeps later, the missing officers remained unaccounted for. In the middle of the 4th sweep, their voices came crackling back on the radio. They were screaming for help. When asked to provide their location, they only said, "She took us under the toy store." The only toy store in the mall was in the very back, a small, narrow shop that had once been called World of Toys. As the officers converged on the shop, the lights inside flickered on. The 2 officers stumbled out, limping and bleeding. A moment later, a young woman followed. Upon seeing her, both officers became hysterical. The woman complied with orders when officers told her to drop her weapons and raise her hands. Neatly arranged in the center of each palm were 3 small eyes. The woman was arrested. Per the incident report, she expressed pain when one of the officers pressed too hard on her hands. She introduced herself as Nicole. When asked what she had done to the officers, she answered that she was just doing her job. When asked to clarify, she said, "They were web rippers. We kill web rippers and use them to repair the web. But I knew I wouldn't kill them today." She shifted her hands meaningfully. "I saw that through my hands. It's why I let you catch me." She refused to elaborate further. 4 days after being booked into the county central receiving facility, she posted bail. Shortly after her release, representatives from NASQ apprehended her. This inmate is a very special case. Like many T-class agents, Nicole P. often fails to display cooperation with agency directives. However, she is the only inmate in the facility with precognitive abilities. The value of the instances of her cooperation currently outweigh the instances of non-cooperation, particularly in light of the fact that she has frequently and repeatedly expressed fear and disgust of the Harlequin. Nicole P. presents as a woman approximately 30 to 35, with blonde hair, green eyes, and an athletic build. She suffers major depressive disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder. However, she is generally pleasant and has repeatedly expressed willingness to work with both Dr. Wingeride and T-class agent Christoph Gaudio. The assistant interviewer would like to note that immediately prior to the interview, She said the only reason she agreed to talk was due to the presence of Christophe W. It should also be noted that prior to this interview, no one at the agency was aware of any link between this inmate and inmate 23. For many reasons, this link is of immense concern to administration. Further investigation is required. Interview subject: La Dama. Classification string: cooperative/destructible/Gaian/constant/low/epili. Interviewers: Rachel B. and Christophe W. Date: 12/14/2024. Whatever else he might have been, Marley was the love of my life. No one understood. From the minute we latched on to each other, people kept asking me, why? I always said things like, because I like him or we're in love. Those were lies, though. And lying gets old. So when my friend Brianna asked, seriously, what do you see in him? I told her, it's not so much what I see in him, as much as he sees everything in me. She rolled her eyes and went, let's try again. Why do you love him? I was obsessed with theater back then, so I threw a Christopher Marlowe quote at her. Why do you love him who the world hates so? Because he loves me more than all the world. That quote was particularly appropriate because Marley's full name is Marlowe, just like the playwright. That's why, Brianna, I told her, because he loves me more than anything or anyone. There's a lesson there for you. Did you know that? Probably not. I only know because I've seen it, but it's a lesson you can only learn on your own. Remember it when the time comes, because trust me, the time is coming. But I'm not talking about Marley. You don't want to hear about him anyway. You don't want to hear the love of my life. You want to hear about my best friend. And no wonder. Growing up, my best friend was a serial killer. His name was Sorry, and I met him at the mall after my mom died. The day of her funeral, my dad, who abandoned us the week she got her diagnosis, threw a tantrum when I wouldn't hug him. He said, I can't stand the way you look at me, Nikki. It's like there's nothing inside you. Looking at you is like looking at a crocodile, or a shark, or a goddamn spider. My mom never said anything like that to me. Ever. Her death was as far from sudden as Saturn is from the sun. But even though I knew she was dying, even though I understood on an intellectual level that her illness would eventually kill her, the key word was eventually. In my heart of hearts, I thought she would find a way to be there, to be with me, until I didn't need her anymore. When she died, my heart became a hole the exact shape and size of her, a hole that only heightened the primal, panicked loneliness that is the purview of the newly motherless. I missed her so much. I still do. Every minute, every day. Before she died, our favorite place was the East Hills Mall. She took me there every Sunday to window shop, eat lunch, and watch a matinee. So even though it felt empty without her, I clung to the mall after she died. Every Sunday afternoon, I spritzed myself with her perfume and made my dad drive me to the mall, where I window shopped and ate at the food court and took myself to see a movie. I cried every time, as silent and still as the spiders my father had compared me to. No one would even know I was weeping unless they looked right at me. No one ever looked at me. No one ever saw me except my mom, and she was gone. I usually quit crying by the time the credits rolled. That changed on an unseasonably oppressive afternoon in May. That day, the tears just wouldn't stop. I curled up in the seat and covered my face while the lights went on, and everyone else trickled out of the theater. Only when the theater was empty did I exit into the lobby, hiccuping and puffy-faced, where I waited for my father to come pick me up. Minutes stretched into an hour, 2, 3. Syrupy sunlight poured through the skylights, stinging my swollen, sweating face. Finally, fresh tears pricked my eyes. He wasn't coming. I was so unimportant, so completely forgettable, that my own father couldn't bother to remember me. I spun around and marched away, wiping tears and terror away in equal measure. Fine. Fine. Let him forget. I'd stay at the mall all night, basking in the echoes and the heat, and the memory of my mother's perfume. It was a hell of a lot better than my dad's house, where I had to listen to him stomp around while his girlfriend soothed their new baby every minute of every day. I marched all the way to the end of the mall, trying and failing to absorb the ambience, the activity, the excitement, the being, just like I'd used to asterisk, but it was impossible. The mall was like a happy hive that I couldn't join even though I was right there inside of it. People parted around me, but didn't spare me a glance. It felt like I was the wrong end of a magnet pushing all the other magnets away. But that was the story of my life, wasn't it? No brothers or sisters, no cousins, no friends from school or church. Something about me repelled. The only people who ever came close to my heart were my mother and my grandpa, who lived in New York City, which might as well have been the moon for all the good it did me. It had always been that way, and the reason wasn't up for debate, nor was it a mystery. My own father had unwittingly admitted exactly what he, and probably everyone else, thought of me the night after my mother's funeral. I was a crocodile, a shark, a goddamn spider. I wiped my eyes again. It's okay, I told myself. Spiders are useful. At least they kill flies. Dad doesn't even do that. I reached the end of the mall and found myself faced with three choices: a department store, a cookie shop, and World of Toys. The toy store was my favorite store of all time. My mom and I used to spend hours there together. It was bursting with children now. I ached to be among them, to smile and be smiled at, to play, to make friends, to escape my own pain for just a little while. But I knew it wouldn't happen. They'd just ignore me if I was lucky, and taunt me if I wasn't. I sat on a bench and stared down at the polished floor. It was so shiny I saw my own dim reflection. I wished it was a better, brighter reflection, because I wanted to look deep into my own eyes. I wanted to see whether they were the eyes of a girl or the eyes of a spider. Someone sat beside me, breaking the reverie. Instinctively, I stood up to leave, but the newcomer touched my arm. I looked down, startled. No one had touched me in weeks, not since my grandpa hugged me at the funeral. The hand that was touching me now was pale and long-fingered, with prominent knuckles and bruised-looking nails. Feeling hypnotized, I tracked hand to wrist, wrist to arm, arm to shoulder, up a long neck to a face covered in a hospital mask. Above the rim of the mask were two bright green eyes full of concern. Profoundly gentle eyes, eyes that saw me. "Are you all right?" he asked. Just like that, my shields came down. I was disarmed. The voice was everything I needed in that moment. Gentle, soft, caring. "I'm fine," I almost said. But why lie? I was sick of lying. I lied to my father and his girlfriend, to my teachers and classmates, to everyone I came across every day of the week. I lied because they expected me to. So why lie to someone who wanted the truth? "Nothing is okay," I answered. "My mom died last month, and my dad was supposed to pick me up 3 hours ago, but he forgot. And now I want to cry, but I don't want everyone to see. I don't like people to see me cry, either." Purple shadows spread under the green eyes like upside-down wings. He looked sick. But of course he was sick. Why else would he wear a mask? I wondered if he was going to make me sick too. Probably, but I didn't care. "What happened to your mother?" he asked, "if you don't mind me asking." "She was very ill," I answered, echoing the words of my father and grandfather, of doctors and therapists, and my mother herself. "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" I thought of my father's new baby. "No." "Is there anyone else who can pick you up? An aunt or uncle? Maybe grandparents?" "My grandpa would if he was here, but he's not. He lives in New York. I wish I could live with him. He has a seeing eye dog named Bugsy." I caught myself just then and immediately wished I could take everything back. I was talking to a stranger, a man stranger. How stupid was I? If my mother really was looking down on me from heaven like my stepmom said, then she was surely throwing a fit. And what the hell had gotten into me? I hadn't talked this much in months. in years. And here I was, spilling my soul to this stranger. Do you want to go find someone to call him? No, I'm mad at him for forgetting me. But I'd rather be here than home. I wiped my eyes again, but to my surprise they were dry. Then I held out my hand. I'm Nicky. His green eyes crinkled. I wondered if it was dangerous to touch him. Not for me, but for him. Experience with my mother's illness taught me that it's very easy to make sick people sicker with a careless touch or breath. But took my hand in his and shook it. Good to meet you, Nicky. I'm sorry. For what? That's my name. My name is Sorry. He looked around the mall. So, you don't want to go home, and you've already seen a movie. Are you hungry? No. Well, what's your favorite store? I don't know, I lied. He held out his hand again. Then how about I take you to my favorite store? I hesitated, staring at the bruised nails and long fingers. Don't be afraid, he said. I'm not scary. I promise. I doubted that, but there were people all around us. There wasn't anything he could do to me without someone noticing and intervening. So I took his hand and hid a smile as he led me, of all places, into a world of toys. None of the other customers spared me a glance. I was so disappointed, so bizarrely embarrassed about being an entity, that it took a minute to realize that they barely looked at Sorry either. For the first time in weeks, I felt myself relax. Sorry led me to the back corner, where there was a nondescript gray door. He opened it. I felt my hackles go up. But I needn't have worried. He propped it wide open before beckoning me inside. It was small and lined with tables, with a cracked concrete floor. The tables were cluttered with broken toys. Rising among the detritus like skyscrapers were beautiful sculptures. It took me a moment to realize that the sculptures were made with broken pieces. Is this like your workshop? I asked. One of them. He pulled out a chair at the nearest table. Even though I didn't exactly want to, I sat down. How many do you have? 2. Where's the other one? His eyes crinkled again. Close by. Fine, I thought. He could keep his stupid toy-making Santa Claus secrets. I turned my attention to the creation before me. It was fascinating and a little scary. A porcelain doll with 3 heads, 6 arms, and a tail that had clearly been appropriated from a Godzilla figurine. That's creepy, I said, but pretty too. I know. He started picking through the pieces arrayed on the table, choosing the best ones. Parts that were clean and shiny, things that would have looked new had they not been broken, and set them in front of me. Do you want to try? To my intense surprise, I did. While we talked, I built. I only paid half the attention I should have, following an instinct I didn't know I possessed. I had no idea what I was doing, but somehow knew when I had finished. So did he. We both pushed our chairs back and studied the thing I'd made. Long and thin, skinny arms desperately outstretched with hands like claws. Airy and almost inhuman, but not quite. It's my mom, I said. Even though I hadn't known it until the words left my mouth, I knew it was true. It's haunting, he told me, but beautiful too. He glanced up at the wall. At a clock I hadn't even noticed. It's late. Do you think your father remembered to come? I hope not, I said. If he did, I'm going to be in trouble. We should probably check anyway. He held out his hand for a 3rd time. I grabbed it happily, wrapping my fingers around his narrow palm the way I'd once wrapped them around my mother's. The toy store was almost empty and reeked of bleach. That could only mean it was almost closing time. I saw 3 kids sorting through a shelf of picture books with 2 spines, and 2 teenagers talking intently. One was a tall blonde girl, the other a boy whose curly dark hair shone under the lights. Everyone ignored us except the boy. He looked at me as we left, watching intently. I stared back curiously, wondering what he saw. I didn't know it then, but that was Marley. I'm not telling you about Marley. Then we were out of the store and into the main promenade. Up beyond the skylights, the sky was dark. My stomach clenched unpleasantly. I was going to be in so much trouble. Sorry led me to the front of the mall. My heart immediately fell to the floor. My father was standing there with a police officer, a security guard, and a lady who could only be a manager. Dad's red face shone under the lights, sweat glowing like beads of amber as he yelled at them all. Sorry's hand slid out of mine. I'll see you again soon. Then he was gone. I turned around, but even though the mall was nearly empty, I couldn't see him anywhere. I turned to face the front at the exact moment my father noticed me. Tears stung my eyes again. I willed them away and held my head up high as Dad ran to meet me. For a second, I thought I was going to get slapped. Instead, he dropped to his knees and hugged me. It was the first time in months. He held on so tightly I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. "Where were you?" he asked. The volume on my mental loop increased dramatically. It's like looking at a crocodile, or a shark, or a goddamn spider. I got lost. "Are you okay? Did anyone hurt you?" The hair on the back of my neck prickled. Somehow, I knew that Sorry was watching. "No. I miss Mom." His face spasmed. I saw sorrow, guilt, anger, shame. He pulled me into another hug. "I know." His arms tightened painfully. "But don't do that again." "I won't." I lied. "I promise." My father grounded me for 2 weeks following what he called my kidnapping scare. Even though I hated it, part of me was grateful. The moment we left the mall, my imagination roared into a horrifying sort of overdrive, examining every terrible scenario that could have occurred at Sorry's hand. By the time we got home, I was too scared to sleep. I told Sorry everything about myself. What if he tracked me down? What if he broke into my house? What if my father found out? What if something even worse happened? The terrors of childhood are uniquely powerful and overwhelming. They are hypnotic, paralytic, all-encompassing emotional typhoons. My fear or Sorry was no different. But like all storms, it passed. And on Monday afternoon, I went back to the mall. I found Sorry inside World of Toys, standing behind the counter. The wall behind him was full of big dark holes. The sight made me shiver. Then he smiled, and my fear evaporated. His eyes crinkled over the paper mask. "I'm so glad to see you." I don't even remember what we did. I only remember that being with him gave me the same comfort as being with my mother. We talked about everything and nothing. Talking to him was so easy it scared me. The only thing I didn't want to talk about with him was my dad, even though he kept asking. I deflected. I was afraid that talking about him would somehow jinx my friendship with Sorry. But it went even deeper than that. In my heart, my father was the opposite of my mother. In other words, the very last thing I wanted to think about when I was at the mall. But Sorry just wouldn't let up. Finally, I snapped. "We don't get along, okay?" He said I'm creepy like a spider because I look at him weird and don't hug him enough or whatever. Sorry gave me a confused look. There's nothing wrong with that. Everything in this world either is predator or prey, order or chaos, a spider or a fly. Being called a spider is a compliment. From you, maybe, because you're weird. But it definitely wasn't a compliment coming from him. Just because he's too stupid to know it's a compliment doesn't make it any less of one. I looked up at him, stunned. No one, not my grandpa, not my mom, and certainly not me, had ever referred to my father as stupid. It was blasphemy, a notion so thoroughly forbidden that I'd never even dared to think about thinking it. "Did you know," Sorry asked, "that spiders can sense other spiders? They're able to seek each other out, especially if one's in trouble." I didn't know much about spiders, but I knew they were solitary creatures, so this sounded like grade A bullshit. Spiders eat other spiders, dude. Not always. The good spiders know better. They stay in their own territory, hunt their own prey, keep out of each other's way. But when their home is in danger, they come together. How come no one's ever told me that before? He leaned across the table, lean and liquid. Because you've never met someone who understands spiders. His eyes were bright on the surface, but dark underneath. The kind of eyes that rose silently from the depths of a river before swallowing you whole. Eyes so still they almost didn't look human. A crocodile, or a shark, or a goddamned. Are you saying you're a spider too? Those glassy, bright but dark eyes crinkled. I am. And I've waited a very long time to meet another one. I looked down quickly to hide the warmth in my face. What do spiders do, exactly? Spiders always do what needs to be done, no matter what. I caught a whiff of bleach and wrinkled my nose. What kind of things need to be done? Sorry looked up sharply. His eyes lost their smiley crinkle and their light, leaving flat, alien darkness. Panic bloomed in my chest, thick and somehow lush. My muscles tensed up, ready to spring and sprint, even though I knew I could never outrun him. Then I realized he was focused on someone behind me. "Nicky," he said softly. "Look at that man." I turned. The stench of bleach intensified as a headache sparked to life behind my eyes. The man in question wasn't much more than a boy, thin and bony with sad eyes and a sheaf of dark hair that shone copper in the lights. "Do you see anything wrong with him?" The man drifted toward us, scanning the shelves with their myriad toys. As he came closer, I caught another eye-watering whiff of bleach. "I don't see anything wrong with him." I turned to face Sorry. The darkness in his eyes was still there. Worse, it had dripped down to the rest of him. The easy brightness he normally exuded was gone, replaced with stillness and shadows. "But he smells really strong, like bleach." And just like that, Sorry lit up again. "Bleach? Yeah, it's like." I struggled to find words. I didn't yet know the word caustic, but that's what I was trying to describe. Like a cloud, it burns my eyes. It's almost like poison. "That's exactly what it is," Sorry said. "Is he poisoned? Should we call 911? Is that what spiders do?" I didn't even realize I was half out of my chair until Sorry's hand slid over mine and pressed down. "No," he said. I lowered myself back to the chair, watching Sorry with repulsed fascination. His brightness was flicking on and off like a light bulb in a broken lamp. I'd never seen anything like it, could barely believe I was seeing it. Light and smiles 1 second, reptilian flatness the next. My friend, followed by a monster. Friend, monster, friend, monster, friend. He slid across the table again. I leaned in instinctively, even though it was the last thing I wanted to. "He isn't poisoned, Nicky. He is poison." Most people would never be able to tell. But we can, because we aren't like other people. We're more. "We're spiders," I said. Sorry smiled. Then he said, "I haven't shown you the shop rules. Do you want to see? Did I break any?" He laughed. "No, you couldn't even if you tried. Because the rules aren't for spiders. The rules are for flies and web rippers, but spiders still have to know the rules." "What are web rippers?" "Spiders that stopped weaving the web and decided to tear holes in it instead. Don't worry. I'll show you how to deal with them later. First, the rules." He went behind the counter and pulled out a piece of paper that said, "Rules for TKE World ROULATT. Don't leave anything that's yours inside. Don't take anything with you when you go. Don't open any doors. Ignore the tunnels. Stay out of the flowers. Don't touch the red mold. Leave the animals inside. Don't go anywhere with the Moon King. Don't raid the blue books. If you see yourself, have fun. If it has too many eyes, then run it." I grimaced. "Sorry, those are some creepy rules. Want to see something else that's creepy?" I noticed, then, that the store was empty except for us. "I guess," I said cautiously. His eyes were practically glowing. He took me by the hand and led me to the wall behind the counter. The wall with all the holes. "Reach in." He pointed to the biggest hole. It bled darkness the way lamps bleed light. "And spread your fingers." I did. A second later, Something inside the wall grabbed my hand. I shrieked and pulled it out. Then I laughed and put it back in. Whoever was in there laced their fingers through mine. It tickles. I'm glad you like it, he said. Because guess what? It's your present. It's a work in progress, but I'm making it just for you. Images of glorious giant dolls and animatronic animals filled my brain. The kind of toys only kids can dream of. And I dreamed of them for days. I wish I could say the hands in the wall were the strangest thing that ever happened between Sorry and me, but they weren't even the weirdest thing that happened that week. 4 days after the wall hands, Sorry beckoned me behind the counter again and showed me a tunnel. A tunnel. A literal tunnel. In the floor. There's a surprise for you on the other side, he told me. Something just for spiders. The rules say we have to stay out of tunnels. The rules are for flies. I didn't want to go, but I didn't know how to say so. I also didn't want to tell them no. So I went through the tunnel. At the other end was another, better mall. Like an East Hills mall from a brighter, better world. And I don't know how to describe it, except to say that it truly felt like home. I'd never felt that sense of home before, and only felt it a second time after I met Marley. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. But above all, it was a relief. It made me cry for sheer joy. Once I calmed down, Sorry led me around the new mall. There was so much there, so many more people, and it was so much bigger and happier. East Hills was a small and super dingy little single-story mall. This place was 3 stories high and beautiful. Sorry and I stayed long after the crowds left and the lights went off, dodging security guards and alarms. We chased each other around the rim of the fountain, stole cookies from the shop, and loaded up on bootleg Pokemon cards from the kiosks on the promenade. I felt like I was home, like when my mother was alive and my father was with us, and we were all happy. After what must have been hours, we went back through the tunnel. It late, beyond late, so he made me a little bedroll in his workshop and tucked me in. Sorry, I said. I wish you were my dad. Would you wish that even if I was a monster? I thought of my father, who couldn't stand me, of my mother, who had left me, of my stepmom, who pretended I didn't exist, of my grandfather, who refused to let me live with him, even after I begged. All parents are monsters, I said, so I don't care. He laughed, then started to sing softly. A lullaby. I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of brighter worlds and the mysterious hand-holding present inside the wall. When I woke up, I asked him about it. His eyes crinkled, like always. I'm still working on it. That weekend, he put me to work in his workshop. He told me to make whatever I wanted and to follow my instincts, and gave me a bin full of pieces that were weird, even creepy. But that suited me just fine, because I was weird and creepy. I was a spider, after all. A few days later, Sorry took me through another tunnel. I thought we were going to the other mall again. I was wrong. Where he took me was even better. A massive forest, deep and dark, with a still black lake on the horizon and fireflies everywhere. Be careful, he told me. This is where the Moon King lives. You said the rules aren't for spiders. This rule is for you. The memories start melting together after that. The next one I remember clearly is being in World of Toys, maybe a week later. I remember the smell. Bleach, a flood of bleach. Enough bleach to drown the whole happy, filthy world. I turned and saw a girl. I couldn't tell you what she looked like. All I can remember is the stench, the way it made my eyes burn and stomach turn. Nikki, Sorry whispered, send her into the workshop. Why? So I can talk to her about her smell, privately, so she doesn't get embarrassed in front of the other customers. That's what I did. Only it almost didn't work. The girl was hesitant, like she could see through me, so I kind of lost it and pretended to be sick. I told her there was a phone inside the workshop. Could she please use it to call my dad? That worked. The door closed behind her. I glanced around the store. checking to see whether anyone noticed her going inside. When I turned around again, the workshop door was gone. Just a blank expanse of wall where it had been 10 seconds prior. I waited for a long time. The door didn't reappear. Neither did Sorry. When it started to get dark, I went home. My father started screaming the second I walked through the front door, so I spun around and marched right back out again. I stomped over to the empty playground and plopped down in one of the swings, staring up at the light-polluted sky and withering in the humid, hot dark. After a while, I heard a shuffle behind me and caught a whiff of bleach, so powerful it made my throat tighten. It was a teenager, picking his way through the playground. I didn't know him then, but I do now. Better than I know anyone. Better than I'll ever know anyone. It was Marley. I'm not telling you about Marley. You can't make me. The scent of bleach frightened me, so I trekked the 3 miles back to the mall. It was only 20 minutes to closing, so I hurried to the back and burst into World of Toys. To my immense relief, Sorry stood behind the counter. But as I drew closer, his eyes went dark. The kind of darkness that drowns you. Why? He asked. Do you smell like a web ripper? I told him about the boy in the park, how he didn't come near me, and I didn't go near him because he smelled so bad it made my throat hurt. The brightness flickered back into his eyes. If you ever smell bleach like that again, bring them to me. I promised that I would. And for a while, we just kept doing what we were doing. I loved it. I lived for it. I lived for the mall and for the days I got to see Sorry. For the days I got to feel seen. For the days I felt like I was home. Those days ended when a woman named Rebecca walked into World of Toys. That was the first time Rebecca ended something that made me happy. I'm not telling you about the second time. Rebecca came to the store to meet Marley, but I didn't know that then. I didn't even know her name. I only knew that she stank of bleach. The stench made me gag. I started to cough the way people start coughing when they eat something they're allergic to. Like a giant was crushing my windpipe. Rebecca hurried over. She kept asking, "Are you okay? Are you okay, sweetie? Where's your parents?" I was coughing too hard to utter a word, let alone explain that she was the reason I was coughing in the first place. I staggered off, head swimming, eyes streaming. "Help me," I wheezed. "Please." Rebecca followed me all the way to World of Toys, where I collapsed in front of Sorry's workshop. Sorry came out immediately. Dark spots swarmed my eyes, dancing like flies. Sorry had a quick conversation with Rebecca. Together, the two of them carried me inside the workshop. Once the door shut, I could breathe again. Like the giant had released my windpipe. Right as I sucked in my first breath, Rebecca screamed. I couldn't see anything through my watering eyes, but I smelled blood. I heard something. A heavy thud, a wet choking sound, and Rebecca stopped screaming. "What did you do?" My voice was raspy and weak. "Sorry, what happened?" Sorry knelt down and wiped my eyes. "Nikki," he said. I looked over his shoulder. Rebecca was crumpled in a heap, her clothes already stained with blood. Sorry grabbed my face and turned it to his. "Look at me. I'm going to show you what we do with web rippers. Do you remember the rules?" I nodded. "Remember." He took my hands and rubbed circles in my palms with his thumbs. "They're for flies. Flies and web rippers. That's what spiders do. We kill flies and we kill web rippers." I couldn't help it. I started to cry. Sorry brushed my tears away again. "I'm going to show you something, Nikki. Remember, the rules aren't for us. The rules are for flies." He pulled down his mask, showing me his face for the first time. Neatly arrayed along his cheekbones and his jaw were 6 green eyes. "What are you?" I asked. "A spider, just like you." Then he pulled me to my feet and led me to Rebecca. She whimpered when she saw me. Blood dribbled from her mouth. "Your present is ready," Sorry told me. "You'll get it tonight, as long as you finish this." What am I supposed to do? Cut her open. We need her sinews to repair the web. They need to be fresh so the knots will hold. He forced her to stand up, then pressed the knife into my hand. Rebecca sobbed so hard she gagged. I hesitated. Then I whirled around and stabbed Sorry through one of his eyes. As he screamed and staggered, I grabbed Rebecca by the hand and ran. As we tore through the toy shop, something in the wall, something with eyes that glittered through the very same hole through which I'd stuck my hand 100 times by now, bellowed. We ran out into the mall. Rebecca was slow. She was bleeding everywhere and kept slipping on her own blood. She kept trying to wrench away from me. She kept screaming, "Your hands. What's wrong with your hands?" Sorry chased us. He was screaming too. "Come back," he said. "Come back. It's okay. I'm not angry. I love you. Come back. Come see your present. I made it just for you." In between his screams, I heard another bellowing roar. Finally, the entrance came into view. Behind me, I heard feet slapping the polished floor. 1, 2, 4, 6, more. Too many feet. Too many footsteps pounding closer, closer. "It's your present," Sorry screamed. "Don't run from me." I reached the entrance and shoved Rebecca outside. Unable to help myself, I turned around. I saw my present. It was my mother. A corruption of my mother. That strange little sculpture brought to enormous life. All teeth and grasping claws and glittering eyes. Too many eyes, just like Sorry. A monster, just like Sorry. Because all parents are monsters. It extended a glimmering claw and stroked my cheek as Sorry wailed. I ran away and didn't come back. Not for years. Not until I met Marley. Sorry was a monster, but he taught me what it means to be seen. What it means to be truly loved. I recognized that kind of love in Marley. I'm not telling you about Marley. I won't. I can't. His mother won't let me. No one can control his mother. Not even you. But if you want to try, she's waiting for you in cell 23. I've worked as a crime scene investigator for 25 years. This is my weirdest case. On the 25th of November 2018, the victim pulled into a budget motel in the early hours of the morning. He booked room 12 for a 3-day stay, and on the 4th day, the owner of the establishment sent his son to check on the victim. What he found was something that someone his age should never have witnessed, or anyone for that matter. By the time I arrived at the scene, it had already been cordoned off. Members of the county police department had swarmed the area, and in the absence of the sun, it was the blue and red flashing lights that cast their glow over the building. I made my way past the tenants who were half asleep, doing their best at giving witness testimonial. I stepped by a particularly shaken forensic pathologist who was trying to call his mother and entered room 12. Now, I've been working as a crime scene investigator for more than 20 years. I have dealt with some truly confounding scenes before. In 2006, a body of a missing hiker was found in the woods just on the county line. It had been burnt to a crisp, but only the upper half. Below the waist was completely untouched, as was the surrounding area. More recently, a farmer reported a break-in just after New Year's Eve. Presumably, someone had broken into his warehouse, which housed an industrial animal carcass shredder. It had been used in the night, and a pile of jellied flesh was found clumped at its mouth. Horrifically, it was eventually proven to be human, although couldn't be identified beyond that. Only one other thing was found at the scene. Within the remains was a small steel plaque about the size of a business card with the number 000-2916 engraved in it. I say all this for simple context. I am no stranger to the unexplainable, but what I saw in room 12, it still keeps me up at night. The following are excerpts from the crime scene report I filed that day. Incident number: 24/7/11. Date of incident: November 29, 2018. Time of arrival: 11:54 p.m. Location: Room 12, Sir Sleep a Lot Motel, Yellow Smoke County. Reporting Officer: Detective Arthur Graham, Yellow Smoke County Police Department. Victim name: John Doe, name yet to be confirmed through fingerprint or DNA. Gender, male. Age, estimated to be mid-40s. Occupation, unknown. Suspects, none at present. The victim checked into the Sur Sleep a Lot motel on the morning of November 25, 2018. He informed the motel owner, Mr. John Kelly, that he would be staying for 3 days. No known associates or visitors during the stay. Victim was found laying on bed in supine position. Victim had skin removed crudely. Patches of flesh hang loosely, revealing bone in some areas. Teeth indents on right part of pelvic bone will be examined. The victim's head is absent from the scene. Notably, the body had been dressed in what appeared to be women's undergarments, specifically a pair of lace stockings and a torn satin slip. Neither items of clothing belonged to the victim. The body was likely dressed post-mortem. Addendum. Marks on right part of pelvic bone were positively identified as being from a human juvenile, estimated as between the ages of 3 and 6. No dental record had been traced. Blood covers every inch of the room's 4 walls and carpet. The blood spray appears to be inconsistent with splatter from traumatic injury, possible use of pressurized device. The amount of blood was determined to be approximately 2 gallons, or 135% of the victim's total volume. Teeth were found on the room's desk, 33 in total, arranged into a circular pattern 10 inches in diameter. The careful arrangement appears to be ritualistic. The teeth are currently assumed to have been belonging to the victim. The location of the victim's head has not been identified. Addendum. The findings of the forensic odontologist have determined that 32 of the 33 teeth belong to a person matching the victim's description, a Caucasian male in his 40s. One of the teeth matches a younger Caucasian female. It was eventually connected through dental records to be from 24-year-old Alyssa Hadland, reported missing in 1997. The Hadland case was archived in 1999 due to absence of evidence. The victim's tongue was discovered in the bathroom sink, exhibiting a complete severance at the base. The incision appeared clean and precise, suggesting the use of a surgical grade or extremely sharp cutting instrument. Notably, the tongue was found in isolation within the sink, devoid of any other biological material, indicating that it may have been intentionally relocated post-excision. First responders noted signs of tampering on the coin-operated television in the room, which intermittently activated to static approximately once an hour. The television will be deconstructed for forensic examination to recover latent fingerprints and other trace evidence related to its manipulation. Addendum. Both of the victim's eyes were recovered from the interior of the room's coin-operated television. The television screen had been removed, and the eyes were placed within the cavity where the cathode ray tube was situated. This positioning suggests deliberate placement, indicating a possible symbolic motive. The only item of clothing found at the scene belonging to the victim was one pair of denim jeans, which witness John Kelly recalls being worn by the victim the morning he checked in. The jeans were contaminated with the victim's blood. In the pockets were found a one-way bus ticket from the towns of Cosgrave to Mayor's Income, one packet of apple-flavored gum, and a button. No other possessions of the victim were found. A pair of small leather lace-up shoes were found at the foot of the bed. From the lack of blood stains, we can assume the shoes were placed there after the homicide. Addendum A. A shirt likely belonging to the victim was found 3 weeks later partially buried in a field in San Tommaso, a small town 240 miles south of Yellow Smoke. The shirt matched the description given by John Kelly of the victim. Blood samples taken from the shirt were a strong match to those taken from the crime scene. Although without the identity of the victim, a definitive link is challenging to corroborate. Addendum B. The small shoes found at the crime scene were dated to 1909 and determined to have some value among antique dealers. Due to their small size, they can be assumed to be children's shoes. The room showed no obvious signs of damage. The furniture appeared to have been undisturbed, although a Bible was missing from the bedside cabinet. Neither John Kelly nor his son David, lead witnesses of the case, recall seeing the victim with any luggage. For this reason, it is unclear if his possessions were taken, or if he simply had none to begin with. The motive of this homicide remains unclear. I'll save you the rest of the procedural formalities. I've lost track of how many nights I've spent awake, staring at my computer screen reading and rereading this report. It stayed with me for the past 6 years, constantly at the back of mind. At my personal behest, the case remained open despite insufficient evidence and a complete lack of any leads. When it was finally shelved at the beginning of this year, they were no closer to solving it than we were the day we found him. Earlier this week, I learned that it had been reopened by the FBI. I assumed that there must be someone else in this department who felt the same way about the case as I did, strong enough to reach out and request assistance from the feds. I was tasked with compiling any and all digital evidence we had on the case onto a USB flash. I felt weird combing through all the reports, files, and forensics. It felt like I was visiting an old friend. I added the documents I wrote up on the day, the dozens of crime scene photos and witness statements. I've studied them all meticulously myself. I doubted some Yale boy with a corner office could do any better. I kept trailing through the earmarked files, checking and double-checking if there was anything I'd missed. It was dark now. I spent the day working from home, hunched over my computer in my sorry excuse for a library. That's what my job mostly consists of now. I couldn't wait for retirement. Maybe then I would have the time to read some of these books I have lying around. I decided I was finished for the night. I'd squeezed every piece of relevant information I could find onto that hard drive. It was up to the FBI now. I only hoped that if our victim left any family behind, they could one day get some closure from this. I was about to shut my computer down when something caught my eye. Witness_ONEMP3. It was an audio file. Somehow I hadn't noticed it before. Hell, I don't think I had even listened to it before. To my knowledge, all the witness statements taken that night were written. I clicked on it, figuring it must have been taken from David Kelly, the kid who'd found the body. I took a sip of my last dregs of coffee and sat back in my chair, jacking up the volume. The audio wasn't the best quality. It was shrouded in the static of an analog recording, and to my shock, the supposed first witness had a woman's voice. The following is a transcript of what was on that file. First responder: what were you doing in the area before you discovered the body? Witness 1: I'm staying in room 14, the room next door to where it happened. Been there for the past 2 weeks, thereabouts. I've come on hard times recently, you know how it is. I was living out of a van until this, but it wasn't exactly reliable. First responder: apologies, ma'am. I meant what were you doing immediately before discovering the body? Witness 1: right. Well, I came back from work around 9. I clean at the elementary school in town. I came back and spent the rest of the day in my room. I had dinner and I was just catching up with the news before I went to sleep. First responder: can you describe how and when you found the body? Witness 1: gee, it must have been around 10. I was turning in for the night when I heard a banging noise from next door. I guessed he must have brought a lady friend over, so I tried my best to ignore it. But it kept getting louder. It didn't sound like a headboard neither, more like someone chopping wood. It was too much for me to ignore, so I got up to go complain. I found the door unlocked, and it opened wide up when I knocked. That's when I saw him, that poor man. First responder: could you please describe the scene you came across as detailed as you can? Witness 1: it was terrible, just terrible. I saw my neighbor kneeling in the corner of his room. His head had been cut off. Can you imagine that? There was blood covering everything around him. I almost vomited there and then. Then I saw the man in the bathroom. There's a pause. First responder: could you please go on? You said there was someone else at the scene. Witness 1: yeah, a real weirdo. I didn't notice him at first. He was just peeking out from behind the bathroom door, watching me. When I did finally notice him, we just stared at each other for a moment or two. Then he just strolled out from his little hiding place. Another pause. First responder, please continue. I assure you everything you have to say will be of some importance to our investigation. Start by describing this man you saw. Witness 1. Och then. He was a freak. I'll say it. When I got a good look at him, I saw that he had this great bulbous head. He was bald as a newborn, and the entire back part of his head was all deformed and sagging down. I think he had this disease. Oh, what's it called? A boy I went to school with had it. First responder, are you thinking of hydrocephalus? Witness 1. Yes. Yeah, that's it. Hydrocephalus. But it was much worse than that kid I knew. Sorry if I'm coming across as rude, but it looked like some horrible octopus. And the front part of his head was far too thin. He has this pointy chin and cheekbones. His eyes were as bulging as his skull, all yellow and white. I think he had cataracts. Oh, and he must have been around 7 feet tall, at least. He was hunching over where he met the ceiling. First responder, can you describe what he was wearing? Witness 1. Sure, he had this battered old duster coat on. It was black, but he was covered in these stitched rags of red and green. The coat hung down to the floor, but I could make out the tips of brown leather boots poking out from the hem. First responder, can you? Witness 1. Oh, pardon my interrupting. But the man, he was holding this. Well, I don't know what it was. It looked like a lobster pot with a handle, and must be 24 blades sticking out of it. Knives mostly, and razor blades, axe heads, chains, that sort of stuff. Anyway, go on. First responder, right. What did you do when he came closer to you? Witness 1. Well, I ran. I just ran. Out of the motel and down the road until I realized everything I owned was in my room. I didn't fancy having to start over from nothing for a third time, so I came back, and that's when you bumped into me. First responder, all right, and how long was it from discovering the body until you called 911? Witness 1. Oh, I didn't call 911, honey. First responder, you didn't. Witness 1. Oh no, by the time I came back from my little jog, the place was already crawling with police. I still haven't been allowed back in my room. First responder, are you aware that? End. His speech became muffled after that until the recording was nothing but static hum that had been in the background since the beginning. After hearing this for the first time, I didn't know what to think. I just sat in my old oak chair until my wife came in to tell me that she was going to bed. I kissed her goodnight and went back to endlessly staring at the computer screen. Eventually, I closed it and stood up. I took the gust stick and left it on my desk. I left the room and locked the door behind me. I changed, washed, and climbed into bed with my wife. I kissed her on the back of her neck and tried to fall asleep. That thing that did this was still out there, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I work security at a prison few even know exists. We aren't told who the prisoners are, only that they can never leave. One just escaped, and I was the first to review the security footage. I've worked prison security my entire life. A few months ago, I got a promotion. Great pay, full accommodations, and one simple assignment: monitor the facility's camera system. No questions asked. I was told the prison and its inhabitants were classified, even to me. The pay was too good, the on-site housing was free, and I had a family to support. So, I didn't ask. Now alarms are blaring all around me, and I don't know what I just saw, but I can't keep it classified. I have reviewed the footage for the 5th time, my hands trembling as I paused it on the prison's head of security, Harris, and his panicked face. The alarms and flashing red lights of the control room filled the screen, disorienting even as a mere observer. Ah, fuck, Harris's voice cracked through the audio feed. The camera zoomed in slightly on the screen he was staring at. The prison cell layout, a grid of green icons, had one glaring anomaly. A single cell on floor 4, in the far corner, flashed an angry red. Unauthorized release, blinked relentlessly in tandem with the deafening alarms. He grabbed the desk phone next to him with a speed that spoke to both his training and his fear. All units to containment floor now. His voice boomed over the speakers. We have a breach. Repeat, we have a breach in cell 4 corner. Code black. Code black. The words reverberated in my mind, the first in the facility's history. Harris didn't have time to dwell on the weight of it. And neither did I. I fast-forwarded the footage, watching guards scramble into action, weapons drawn, their postures rigid with tension. The control room camera shook slightly as Harris grabbed his rifle, slammed in a fresh magazine, and chambered around. He was preparing to join them when gunfire erupted through the audio feed. I rewound and replayed that moment, trying to pinpoint the exact second the chaos began. The reinforced glass gave me a clear view of the containment wing as muzzle flashes illuminated the hallway below. I could see the flash of gunfire, but not the target. As fast as it began, it was over. Harris's movements faltered. His battle-hardened composure cracked as a low, guttural noise filtered through the intercom, something between a growl and a laugh. I shivered, even behind my screen. Harris stepped out of the control room, entering the pitch-black hallway. The rotating red lights painted his shadow in a macabre dance across the walls. Guards rushed past him, forming a defensive line, their voices barely audible over the alarms. "With you, sir. What are your orders?" one shouted. I watched Harris take a breath, his hand tightening on his rifle. "Safety's off. Shoot to kill." His voice carried a forced confidence, but the trembling of his fingers told a different story. They moved forward, deeper into the containment wing. I switched to another camera angle, tracking their progress. The cells lining the walls seemed to come alive with the sounds of screaming, laughing, and pounding as the other prisoners reacted to whatever had been unleashed. They rounded the corner, and my breath hitched. The camera captured the massive steel-reinforced door to cell 4 corner, now twisted and dangling from a single hinge. A jagged gash split its surface, revealing the core beneath. One of the guards whispered, "What in the fuck could do that?" I'd asked myself the same question. Harris stepped forward, slipping on something. The camera zoomed in on the dark puddle beneath his boots. He crouched, touched it, then brought his fingers to his nose. Even without being there, I could almost smell the metallic tang of blood as Harris recoiled. He activated his flashlight, aiming it into the cell. The beam revealed carnage that made me pause the video, bile rising in my throat. Blood coated the walls, limbs and chunks of flesh strewn across the floor. The stench of iron seemed to seep through the screen. One of the guards let out a dry heave, but it was Harris's reaction that haunted me the most. He gagged, visibly shaken, his usual stoic demeanor cracking at the scene around him. The footage jumped as he spun, rifle aimed at a hand taking a weak grip on his ankle. One of his men lay on the floor, torso intact, but legs gone, intestines strung along the floor behind him. The man's voice crackled through the audio. "Behind you." Harris turned, the other guards following his lead. The camera angle shifted to capture what they saw. My blood ran cold. A child, or something resembling one. It clung to the wall like an arachnid, limbs contorted, black eyes hollow and lifeless. Its mouth twisted into a grin that stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I froze the frame, staring at the monstrous visage. It didn't move until Harris did, his voice a choked whisper. "What in the few?" The creature screeched, the sound shrill and inhuman, before lunging. The room erupted into chaos. The guards opened fire, their muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the scene. Screams filled the audio feed, cutting off one by one until only static and the distant wail of alarms remained. The camera feed from the hallway flickered. When it stabilized, the scene was eerily quiet. Blood dripped from the walls and pooled on the floor. Then came the sound. A slow, deliberate scrape. Thud. Scrape. Thud. The creature emerged. dragging Harris's lifeless body behind it. His blood painted a crimson trail on the cold steel floor like a signature written of gore. It approached the far wall, where a sealed door stood. I rewound and played that segment repeatedly, unable to look away as the creature raised Harris by his matted hair. His head lolled, and a weak cough escaped his lips, blood splattering the wall. He was still alive. The door scanner activated with a mechanical ping, a red laser trying to scan his face. Harris's final cry sent shivers down my spine. "No," he said as he tried to keep his eyes sealed tightly. Jagged fingers slithered along his forehead and curled under his eyelids, prying them open, forcing the scanner to accept his retina. Blood and tears flowed down his face as he screamed. The door unlocked with a hiss of decompressed air, large locks unlatching with a clang. The creature discarded Harris with a sickening thud, his head colliding with the wall. I had to stop the footage as his skull gave way, blood and brains spraying the lens. But I forced myself to finish it. The last moments showed the creature crawling through the now open door, slick with gore, leaving behind a facility drowning in silence and death. Its demented form slowly morphing into that of an innocent child. I sat back, the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on me. My hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to type or who to send this to. There were no protocols for this, no contingency plans for whatever it was. All I could think was, it's free, it looks like a child. It is out there amongst all of us. This is my only warning to you all. I will get thrown in prison for posting this, but it doesn't matter. I'll be safer in there than free with that thing out there. God save us all. I spent a year in the psych ward after seeing her terrible beauty. Father O'Connor, I've made an incredible error of judgment, but I don't know who to turn to. I can't tell anyone in the parish, but I feel as though my entire soul is unraveling. I can't keep this inside much longer, and so I'm writing it to you, though I fear it may already be too late. It was on my last evening, before I was taken away. A woman came to my confessional. She wasn't like the usual penitents. Her clothes were ragged and she smelled of the streets. I had almost closed for the evening, but I still took her in. It's my duty after all, and the season of Advent has its own calling for grace. She knelt down in the little box with a deep sigh. Her voice trembled with each word, almost as though it had been ripped from her chest by some invisible force. "Father," she began, "I think I've killed someone." At first, I thought she was speaking metaphorically, but no, it was all too real. She spoke of a man, a figure she had seen lying in an alley days before. She hadn't helped him. She just watched him fade away, her gaze fixed on his suffering as he clutched at his chest, and then died. She said she did nothing, her silence a sin, for she could have spoken and kept him alive. "Do not blame yourself," I told her, my voice steady despite my unease. I was a priest long enough to know how the mind can twist simple events into insurmountable burdens. "You are forgiven. God is merciful." She shook her head, her frail fingers grasping the edge of the confessional. "No, Father, you don't understand. My sister will come for me. She's looking for me. She's going to punish me for not intervening." Her words struck me, unsettling me more than I would like to admit. But as much as I felt for her, I had to remind her that forgiveness was the path to healing. I encouraged her to stay for Mass. I had a sermon to deliver soon, and perhaps it would help her find peace. But she hesitated. "I need to tell you everything, Father. You need to understand why I couldn't help him." Her voice dropped to a whisper. It's my sister. She'll never forgive me. Please, let me explain." But I had no time. The eve of Christmas Eve Mass was about to begin, and I had obligations to my parish. "You are forgiven," I said firmly, "and God knows your heart. I welcome you to stay for Mass." I rose, but when I emerged from the confessional, there was no sign of her, no footsteps, no whisper of a troubled soul in the pews. She had vanished. Later, After the service, I stay to lock up the church. The clock struck 11 as I made my way through the dimly lit nave. I usually don't mind staying after Mass. The solitude of the church at night has always been a source of comfort for me. But tonight, something felt different. I noticed a figure in the back pews, a shadowy form, cloaked and hunched. At first, I thought I had missed someone who had lingered after Mass, but then I realized there had been no one else there when I had finished the sermon. I called from the aisle, my voice cutting through the silence. "Excuse me, the sanctuary is closed for the night." Unlocking up, the figure stirred, and a soft, old woman's voice replied, "I heard your sermon." I froze, unsure of how to respond. My mind went over the words I had spoken just an hour earlier, about how Christmas was a reminder of our relationship with God, how the first nativity was not the birth of Jesus alone, but the moment when even Adam and Eve celebrated with him, with the birth of Seth. The woman's voice trembled again, though this time it carried an unsettling weight, as though it had been buried deep within her for centuries. Yes, I was there, watching them from the darkness. Adam and his new wife. You are right. They did celebrate. A chill swept over me. The blood in my veins turned cold. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice suddenly dry. The figure shifted in the shadows, a long, drawn-out sigh echoing through the church. Then, slowly, the figure lifted its head, revealing glowing eyes peering out from beneath the hood. "I am the oldest daughter of Lilith," the woman said. "But Adam is not my father. My name is Seraphiel." My pulse quickened, but I didn't speak. I had read enough, studied enough, to understand the significance of what she said. Lilith, the first woman, the one cast away, the one forgotten. She leaned forward. "I am looking for my sister. You know her. She is the one who let Jehoshaphat die. You know who he is. You've heard the legend. Jehoshaphat with his lantern." I could feel the sweat trickling down my spine. This wasn't just some lost soul. This wasn't just a penitent asking for forgiveness. This wasn't even human. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. My voice trembled despite my best efforts. "My sister," she repeated, "is the one who failed him. She watched him as he wandered through the world, holding his lantern, and she did nothing." I stood rooted to the spot, trying to reconcile the impossible truth that had begun to manifest before me. "Where is she?" Seraphiel demanded, her voice now a hiss. I stammered, "I don't know. Who are you?" "I told you already," she said, rising to her feet. Her form seemed to grow taller as she did, as though she was shedding her mortal guise. "I am Seraphiel, and I will find her. You cannot stop me." Before I could react, she threw back her cloak and hood, and in a blink, she was airborne, her wings unfurling, black as night, slicing through the dim church air. I turned and ran. My heart raced in my chest as I fled through the aisles, trying to reach the sacristy. But the air behind me grew heavy, thick with the weight of her presence. I could hear her, just behind me, an inhuman growl rumbling from her throat. I threw myself against the door of the sacristy and fumbled for the keys, but before I could lock it, she was there. Her hand struck the door with the force of a battering ram. The sound, her growls, the monstrous hammering, echoed in the church like thunder. I begged for God's mercy, but I was alone in this. The door splintered, the walls trembled, and I heard her, still in the darkness, demanding justice. "I don't know where she is." She vanished. I heard myself protest as she was moving towards me, her eyes glowing in the darkness and fixed upon me. Her silhouette in the shattered doorway was tall and muscular, but curved and feminine. Her growls were deep and angry, like a wounded bear. "She cannot have left. You are hiding her." Seraphiel neared me and I fell down, shaking and flinching. She hesitated and then asked. Her voice, suddenly a mixture of outrage and defeat, vanished. I stammered and wet myself, too terrified for composure. The creature looming over me thought for a moment. I said, "Vanished." You gave her absolution. She has gone to mother, that little wretch. I'll skin her alive. Why I'll, Seraphiel paused. You will bring her back. Be back. I asked, my voice a pinched sound, unrecognizable. You will go to purgatory. A dead priest is always there before Christmas. I've seen to that personally. From there, limbo. When you reach the temple of Lilith, you will find my sister and you will speak lamentation to her. And she will return to this world and complete her duties. Why must I always clean up her mess? Seraphiel had calmed down, and somehow I felt like I was in even more terrible danger. She had said, a dead priest, the way most people say, Thanksgiving turkey. I moaned in dread, sensing her raised claws in the darkness. My execution was so fast and precise that I wasn't sure I was dead, until I noticed I could see my body laying beneath the horrible creature, quite ruined by her claws. I was definitely dead, if that was me down there. I floated above my remains for a moment, and then I felt a kind of calmness, my fear leaving me. Penitent asking for forgiveness. This wasn't even human. What do you mean? I asked, though I already knew. My voice trembled despite my best efforts. My sister, she repeated, is the one who failed him. She watched him as he wandered through the world, holding his lantern, and she did nothing. I stood rooted to the spot, trying to reconcile the impossible truth that had begun to manifest before me. Where is she? Seraphiel demanded, her voice now a hiss. I stammered. I don't know. Who are you? I told you already, she said, rising to her feet. Her form seemed to grow taller as she did, as though she was shedding her mortal guise. I am Seraphiel, and I will find her. You cannot stop me. Before I could react, she threw back her cloak and hood, and in a blink, she was airborne, her wings unfurling, black as night, slicing through the dim church air. I turned and ran. My heart raced in my chest as I fled through the aisles, trying to reach the sacristy. But the air behind me grew heavy, thick with the weight of her presence. I could hear her, just behind me, an inhuman growl rumbling from her throat. I threw myself against the door of the sacristy and fumbled for the keys, but before I could lock it, she was there. Her hand struck the door with the force of a battering ram. The sound, her growls, the monstrous hammering, echoed in the church like thunder. I begged for God's mercy, but I was alone in this. The door splintered, the walls trembled, and I heard her, still in the darkness, demanding justice. I don't know where she is. She vanished. I heard myself protest as she was moving towards me, her eyes glowing in the darkness and fixed upon me. Her silhouette in the shattered doorway was tall and muscular, but curved and feminine. Her growls were deep and angry, like a wounded bear. She cannot have left. You are hiding her. Seraphiel neared me and I fell down, shaking and flinching. She hesitated and then asked. Her voice suddenly, a mixture of outrage and defeat, vanished. I stammered and wet myself, too terrified for composure. The creature looming over me thought for a moment. I said, vanished. You gave her absolution. She has gone to mother, that little wretch. I'll skin her alive. Why I'll, Seraphiel paused. You will bring her back. Be back. I asked, my voice a pinched sound, unrecognizable. You will go to purgatory. A dead priest is always there before Christmas. I've seen to that personally. From there, limbo. When you reach the temple of Lilith, you will find my sister and you will speak lamentation to her, and she will return to this world and complete her duties. Why must I always clean up her mess? Seraphiel had calmed down, and somehow I felt like I was in even more terrible danger. She had said, a dead priest, the way most people say, Thanksgiving turkey. I moaned in dread, sensing her raised claws in the darkness. My execution was so fast and precise that I wasn't sure I was dead, until I noticed I could see my body laying beneath the horrible creature, quite ruined by her claws. I was definitely dead, if that was me down there. I floated above my remains for a moment, and then I felt a kind of calmness, my fear leaving me. I found myself drawn towards a distant glow that felt warm and inviting. There I was, in a misty realm, and beyond it, there was a kind of desolate gray landscape with no sky. I knew that was where I was supposed to go, and so I drifted there. I saw many sad and broken things that were the souls of the lost, and I prayed for them as I went. It seemed like a very long time had passed, and I began to realize I was dead. And it saddened me, for I did not know I would be restored to life, resurrected upon the completion of my task. Instead, I thought about how I was not done with my life, how my parishioners still needed me, and I felt sorry for whoever found my grisly remains, as though slain by a wild animal. I found the Temple of Lilith. There was a kind of reddish glow from inside. The structure was like a pyramid of great dark stones leaning together. There was a hall, and I entered with a kind of fear that was not from my physical body, for I was already dead. My fear was much deeper, older, and more primal. I feared for my very soul, my consciousness, my existence. The place was no temple, for I was a keeper of a sanctuary. Her place was a tomb. I beheld 4 pedestals, one for each of her daughters. Upon the first there were bones stacked, for one of her daughters was dead and removed from the world. The other had vanished and appeared in that place, and she looked like a homeless person, dressed in ragged clothing and kneeling humbly before a throne. I slowly began to look up and saw what sat upon that throne. What I beheld, that terrible beauty, it tore apart my mind, changing me into something else. In that moment, no secret of the universe was safe from my perception. If my mind was a chalice, then it wasn't merely overflowing with nightmarish wisdom, but cracked, melting under the wine of ageless horrors. At once I could see her in 2 forms. One slumbered, a seated and naked woman of gigantic size, and the other of vaguely crimson skin, 2 small ebony antlers from her head. She was both of these forms, one human and one demonic, and also as my spirit burned before her, I saw she was 1,000 living things writhing together to make these bodies, and yet they were all dormant, dead. There was an indescribable wrongness to how still she was, as though her eternal corpse were a blight upon all of creation, never meant to be in such a state. I knew that from her all suffering sprang, and all forms of justice were merely vengeance, and there was something in me that became corrupted and damned to realize such a thing. Your sister sent me to retrieve you. I speak lamentation to you, for you have forsaken your sacred duties, I said to the one who knelt before her. And this betrayal, after you forgave me, I'll not let you rest, you mere mortal. You'll be the one to carry the lantern every Christmas Eve and never know death. I'll punish you for this. She stood, showing she was much like her sister beneath the rags that burst from her as she spread her wings. She grabbed me and dragged me through a coldness, all the way to where my spirit had left my body, my soul's glow, and gripped it like a physical object. I felt her stuffing me back together, pumping my liquids, resuscitating me with her own putrid breath. I coughed and sat up, seeing that there was no mess. I was intact, every last drop. My priestly robes were shredded, and the door still smashed to smithereens, and the younger sister stood over me, admiring her handiwork. I felt my body like a sewn-up doll, stuffed haphazardly, and felt the phantom pain of being torn apart by Seraphiel. I'll go, and I'll keep you where you go. You'll do the work of the immortal man we tasked with the lantern. You live again, priest, and you'll not know death for many ages. You'll ask me for it, and I won't let you have it. You should not have betrayed me. And then she left me there, presumably to return when my duties resume. I then broke down in utter anguish and insanity, driven mad by the terror of what I had seen and experienced. I was found there, and they thought I'd done the damage and torn my clothing, and my scars were like fresh scratches, like I had hurt myself. I was taken to the psychiatric ward and treated. It was only a few days ago they released me. As I write to you, I have the lantern. I must begin my journey with it, a miserable task on foot. through the cold, through the night, alone. From Christmas Eve to Christmas Eve, I will only know this simple duty to carry this light. I will send this letter to you, my friend, and consider it also to be my confession, for I told no one what happened to me. I've seen her, this liminal of whom I betrayed. She was there. She was one of the doctors who treated me, indeed watching over me. She decided I was cured, and she can walk among us, as anyone, I suppose. But I've seen her true form. I've seen them both, and I know they are not like us. They live forever, or become as bones on the pedestal. They are out there, doing terrible things with terrible anger. But they are just her daughters, Father O'Connor. They are just satraps of Lilith. And I have seen her terrible beauty. Your friend and brother, Ignatius. Get us out. We did something bad. Him. And I do something bad every weekend, whether it's steal things, practice our street art skills, or be a general menace to society. This time, we snuck into our old school building. We went through the heavy door on the first floor and turned directly right. The thick concrete walls of the stairwell greeted us. Up we went. The scent of age-old shiny blue paint on concrete is a unique one. I stuck my right hand out and let my manicure glide softly over the dark, glistening paint as we spiraled upwards, floor after floor. The paint was chipping in some places, smooth in others. The walls were at least several feet thick. No windows. Second floor, third floor, fourth floor. Up we went. Old brutalist architecture. Between each turn of the thick cement steps was a small landing. Only a few feet wide, though. We pushed upwards. 14th floor. The black number 14 stood out boldly against the blue background. We were at the top. The stairs ended and a long dark hallway stretched out before us. We crept forward, trying to sneak deeper into the building, until we were greeted by them. I don't know who they were. 2 teachers, some superintendents. Why were they here in the middle of the night? A medium-height man, black curly hair, a tall woman, chiseled cheekbones. Looking back on it, I think they were there just to protect the place. They opened their mouths, said some words. Without thinking, we lunged at them. We tussled with them, knocked the man out. I could still feel his grip on my shirt sleeve as he tried to hold on, slipping into unconsciousness. The woman retreated. Then, we ran. Back downstairs, floor after floor after floor, spiraling downwards. How many floors has it been? I glanced up at the black numbers, painted against the cerulean blue. 14. What? I looked around, kept running. Another floor down. 14. Another floor. Still 14. The cement looked strange, bulging in places. I looked at my partner's face, panicked. Has he noticed anything? He ran downwards. I followed. 14. The paint was skewed in places, no longer a straight diagonal strip parallel to the angle of the stairs. It whipped and lashed out. The walls were no longer straight either. The angles between the ceiling and the wall were smooth, curved. I think I glimpsed the man's body as I ran by. It lay on the stairs below me, his face twisted and strange, dented in. Another floor down. 15. The stairs were no longer stairs. Globs of angular concrete jutted out towards us at strange angles, and each floor was getting smaller. I grabbed my partner's hand, panicked, looked into his eyes. He was doing his best to not look back at me, sweating. Maybe we should go back up, he whispered. We pressed downwards yet again. Still 14. A dead end. The cement was thick, arched and tapered towards us. I whipped my head around, looking for a way out. The man's face, embedded in the cement. He looked like a dummy, looking down at us with a mannequin's eyes. His skin smooth, like the face of a doll that got punched too hard in the face. Unmoving. I could feel my partner's tug on my hand. He pulled me upwards. We ran back up. Up, up, up. I looked at the walls. They were thick. There were no windows, no doors, only the shiny cold blue. We were running back upwards for hours. Where was the real floor 14? Where was the long hallway at the top of the building? We need to find the original woman and man. Apologize to them. Even if I could find a sledgehammer and chisel our way out of the summit, what world awaited us outside? Was it home? Or something else? An endless void of cement that you could never come out of even if you chiseled tunnels for hours. We ran upwards, hand in hand. 14, 14, 14, 14, 14, 14, 14, 14. The walls were looking more and more normal for a while. Until they weren't. It had been hours. It felt like we'd run up hundreds of floors, but it was still 14. There was no hallway, no door, no woman, no man. We hit another dead end. We ran back downwards, exhausted. The dead end came faster this time. The stairs no longer were stairs. The walls were barely walls, slopes of cement covered in blue. Help, please. Get us out. My family has a gruesome history. I know I will be next. The genealogy book sits heavy in my hands, its leather binding cracked and brittle, smelling of dust and something else, something older, something that reminds me of dried blood and forgotten screams. My fingers trace the faded names, each one a testament to a legacy I never asked for, but can never escape. My name is Ezra Peirce. I am the last. The morning light filters through the curtains of our modest suburban home, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. Lilith is in the kitchen, her pregnant belly a gentle curve against her pale blue nightgown. She's humming something, a lullaby, perhaps completely unaware of the weight of history that pulses through my veins. I should have told her before we married, before we conceived our child. But how do you explain a hereditary nightmare that defies rational explanation? My father, Nathaniel, never spoke directly about the curse. Neither did his father, Jeremiah, or his father before him. It was always in hushed whispers, in sideways glances, in the way older relatives would grow silent when certain names were mentioned. The Peirce family, I don't know who they were. 2 teachers, some superintendents. Why were they here in the middle of the night? A medium-height man, black curly hair, a tall woman, chiseled cheekbones. Looking back on it, I think they were there just to protect the place. They opened their mouths, said some words. Without thinking, we lunged at them. We tussled with them, knocked the man out. I could still feel his grip on my shirt sleeve as he tried to hold on, slipping into unconsciousness. The woman retreated. Then, we ran. Back downstairs, floor after floor after floor, spiraling downwards. How many floors has it been? I glanced up at the black numbers, painted against the cerulean blue. 14. What? I looked around, kept running. Another floor down. 14. Another floor. Still 14. The cement looked strange, bulging in places. I looked at my partner's face, panicked. Has he noticed anything? He ran downwards. I followed. 14. The paint was skewed in places, no longer a straight diagonal strip parallel to the angle of the stairs. It whipped and lashed out. The walls were no longer straight either. The angles between the ceiling and the wall were smooth, curved. I think I glimpsed the man's body as I ran by. It lay on the stairs below me, his face twisted and strange, dented in. Another floor down. 15. The stairs were no longer stairs. Globs of angular concrete jutted out towards us at strange angles, and each floor was getting smaller. I grabbed my partner's hand, panicked, looked into his eyes. He was doing his best to not look back at me, sweating. Maybe we should go back up, he whispered. We pressed downwards yet again. Still 14. A dead end. The cement was thick, arched and tapered towards us. I whipped my head around, looking for a way out. The man's face, embedded in the cement. He looked like a dummy, looking down at us with a mannequin's eyes. His skin smooth, like the face of a doll that got punched too hard in the face. Unmoving. I could feel my partner's tug on my hand. He pulled me upwards. We ran back up. Up. I looked at the walls. They were thick. There were no windows, no doors, only the shiny cold blue. We were running back upwards for hours. Where was the real floor 14? Where was the long hallway at the top of the building? We need to find the original woman and man. Apologize to them. Even if I could find a sledgehammer and chisel our way out of the summit, what world awaited us outside? Was it home? Or something else? An endless void of cement that you could never come out of even if you chiseled tunnels for hours. We ran upwards, hand in hand. 14. 14. 14. 14. 14. 14. 14. 14. The walls were looking more and more normal for a while. Until they weren't. It had been hours. It felt like we'd run up hundreds of floors, but it was still 14. There was no hallway, no door, no woman, no man. We hit another dead end. We ran back downwards, exhausted. The dead end came faster this time. The stairs no longer were stairs. The walls were barely walls. Slopes of cement covered in blue. Help, please. Get us out. My family has a gruesome history. I know I will be next. The genealogy book sits heavy in my hands, its leather binding cracked and brittle, smelling of dust and something else, something older, something that reminds me of dried blood and forgotten screams. My fingers trace the faded names, each one a testament to a legacy I never asked for, but can never escape. My name is Ezra Peirce. I am the last. The morning light filters through the curtains of our modest suburban home, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. Lilith is in the kitchen, her pregnant belly a gentle curve against her pale blue nightgown. She's humming something, a lullaby, perhaps completely unaware of the weight of history that pulses through my veins. I should have told her before we married, before we conceived our child. But how do you explain a hereditary nightmare that defies rational explanation? My father, Nathaniel, never spoke directly about the curse. Neither did his father, Jeremiah, or his father before him. It was always in hushed whispers, in sideways glances, in the way older relatives would grow silent when certain names were mentioned. The Peirce family tree was less a record of lineage and more a chronicle of horror. Each generation lost someone, always in ways that made local newspapers fall silent, that made police investigations mysteriously go cold, that made even hardened investigators look away and shake their heads. My great-grandfather, Elias Peirce, was found dismembered in a locked barn, every single bone meticulously separated and arranged in a perfect geometric pattern. No tools were ever found, no explanation ever given. My grandfather, Magnus Peirce, disappeared entirely during a family camping trip. Search parties found nothing, not a strand of hair, not a scrap of clothing. Just a small patch of ground where something had clearly happened, the earth scorched in a perfect circle, as if something had burned so intensely that it consumed everything around it, leaving only a memory of heat. My father, Nathaniel, he was discovered in our family's basement, his body contorted into an impossible position, eyes wide open but completely white, no pupils, no iris, just blank, milky surfaces that seemed to reflect something from another world. And now, here I am, the last Peirce, with a wife who doesn't know, with a child growing inside her, unaware of the genetic lottery they've already been entered into. The genealogy book falls open to a page I've memorized 1,000 times. A loose photograph slips out, a family portrait from 1923. My ancestors stare back, their faces rigid and unsmiling. But if you look closely, and I have, countless times, there's something else in their eyes. A knowledge, a terrible, suffocating knowledge. Lilith calls from the kitchen. Breakfast is ready. Love. I close the book. The eggs grow cold on my plate. Lilith watches me, her green eyes searching, a furrow of concern creasing her forehead. She knows something's wrong. She's always known how to read the subtle tremors in my silence. "You're thinking about your family again," she says. It's not a question. I force a smile. Just tired. But tired isn't the word. Haunted. Terrified. Trapped. My fingers unconsciously trace a small birthmark on the inside of my wrist. A strange, intricate pattern that looks less like a natural mark and more like a symbol. A symbol I'd never been able to identify, despite years of research. It's been in every Pierce male's family photo, always in the same location, always identical. Lilith's pregnancy is now in her 7th month. The baby moves constantly, pressing against her skin like something desperate to escape. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, I've watched those movements and wondered if it's trying to escape something more than the confines of her womb. The genealogy book remains open on the kitchen counter. I catch Lilith glancing at it, her curiosity barely contained. She knows I'm secretive about my family history. Most of my relatives are dead or disappeared, and the few photographs that remain are locked away in a fireproof safe in my study. "Tell me about your great-grandfather," she says suddenly. My hand freezes midway to my coffee mug. There's nothing to tell. I manage. But that's a lie. There's everything to tell. Elias Pierce. The first documented instance of our family's peculiarity. He was a cartographer, always traveling to remote locations, mapping territories no one had ever charted. His journals, the few that survived, spoke of places that didn't exist on any official map. Places with geometries that didn't make sense. Landscapes that seemed to breathe. The last entry, dated December 17th, 1889, was a series of increasingly frantic sketches. Impossible architectural designs, symbols that hurt your eyes if you looked at them too long. And at the bottom, in handwriting that grew more erratic with each line, "They are watching. They have always been watching. The map is not the territory. The territory is alive." Those were his final words. When they found him in that locked barn, his body systematically dismantled like a complex mechanical puzzle, the local sheriff's report read like a fever dream. Bones arranged in perfect mathematical precision. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just reorganization. Lilith's hand touches my arm, pulling me back to the present. "Ezra, are you listening?" I realize I've been staring into nothing, my coffee growing cold, the birthmark on my wrist suddenly feeling hot, burning. "I'm fine," I lie. But the curse is never fine. The curse is always waiting. And our child is coming soon. The ultrasound images are wrong. Not obviously so. Not in a way that would alarm a typical doctor or technician. But I see it. The subtle asymmetries. The impossible angles. The way the fetus's bones seem to bend in directions that shouldn't be anatomically possible. Lilith keeps the images pinned to our refrigerator, a proud mother-to-be displaying her first glimpses of our unborn child. Each time I look, I feel something crawl beneath my skin. Something ancient. Something watching. Dr. Helena Reyes is our obstetrician. She's been nothing but professional. But I've caught her looking at me, not at Lilith. At me. Her eyes hold a recognition that makes my blood run cold. "Everything is progressing. Normally," she said during our last appointment, the pause before "normally" hanging in the air like a barely concealed lie. That night, I pulled out the old family documents again. Tucked between brittle pages of the genealogy book, I found a letter. The paper was so old it crumbled at the edges, but the ink remained sharp. Written by my grandfather Magnus, addressed to no one and everyone. "The child always comes. The child has always been coming. We are merely vessels, carriers. The lineage demands its continuation." What lineage? Continuation of what? Lilith sleeps beside me, her breathing deep and even. Her belly rises and falls, the shape beneath her nightgown moving in ways that feel calculated. Deliberate. I trace my birthmark again. Under the moonlight streaming through our bedroom window, it looks less like a birthmark and more like a map. A map to nowhere, or everywhere. My father Nathaniel's final photographs are stored in a locked drawer in my study. I rarely look at them, but tonight feels different. Something is pulling me toward them, calling me. The photographs are strange, not because of what they show, but because of what they don't show. In each family portrait going back generations, there's a consistent emptiness, a space, always in the same location, as if something has been deliberately erased, removed, but removed before the photograph was even taken. The baby kicks. Hard. So hard that Lilith doesn't wake up, but I see her stomach distort, a shape pressing outward. Not like a normal fetal movement, more like something trying to push its way out, something trying to escape, or something trying to enter. I close my eyes, but I can still see the map, the territory, the birthmark burning like a brand. Our child is coming, and I am terrified of what will arrive. The old courthouse records sit spread across my desk, a constellation of pain mapped out in faded ink and brittle paper. I've been researching our family history for weeks now, driven by something more than curiosity, something closer to survival. Every Pierce male in the last 5 generations died or disappeared before their 35th birthday. Not a coincidence, not anymore. My father Nathaniel, gone at 34. My grandfather Magnus, vanished at 33. Great-grandfather Elias, found mutilated at 35. The pattern is too precise to be random. I've collected newspaper clippings, court documents, medical records. Not the dramatic, sensational evidence one might expect, but the quiet, bureaucratic trail of destruction. Police reports with missing pages, coroner's files with critical information redacted, insurance claims that never quite add up. Lilith finds me here most nights, surrounded by these documents. She doesn't ask questions anymore, just brings me coffee, watches me with those green eyes that seem to hold more understanding than she lets on. The baby's room is almost ready, she says softly, placing a mug beside me. I look up. The nursery door stands open, pale yellow walls, carefully selected furniture. Everything perfect, too perfect. Have you ever wondered, I ask, why some families seem marked by tragedy? She sits down, her pregnancy making the movement careful, calculated. Some people are just unlucky. But I know it's more than luck. Something runs in our blood. Something that doesn't care about love or hope or the carefully constructed life we've built. The birthmark on my wrist throbs. Not painfully, just present, a constant reminder. I pull out the most disturbing document, a psychological evaluation of my grandfather Magnus, conducted 2 months before his disappearance. The psychiatrist's notes are clinical, detached. Patient exhibits extreme paranoia regarding familial curse, demonstrates intricate delusion of systematic family destruction, fixates on biological determinism, shows no signs of schizophrenia, but persistent ideation of inherited trauma suggests deep-seated psychological mechanisms at play. Inherited trauma. The words echo. What if our family's destruction wasn't supernatural? What if it was something more insidious? A genetic predisposition to self-destruction. A psychological pattern so deeply ingrained that each generation unconsciously recreates the same narrative of loss. Lilith's hand touches my shoulder. Coming to bed. I nod, but my mind is elsewhere, calculating. The baby is due in 6 weeks. I have 6 weeks to understand what's happening to our family. 6 weeks to break a cycle that has consumed generations. 6 weeks to save our child. If I can. The research consumes me. I've taken a leave of absence from work. My entire study transformed into a makeshift investigation center. Genetic reports, psychiatric evaluations, family medical histories stretching back over a century. Each document another piece of a horrifying puzzle. Dr. Helena Reyes agrees to meet me privately. She's a geneticist specializing in inherited psychological disorders. recommended by a colleague who knew something was unusual about my family history. Her office is sterile, meticulously organized, nothing like the chaotic landscape of my own research. The Pierce family presents a fascinating case study, she says, sliding a manila folder across her desk. Generational patterns of self-destructive behavior, early mortality, and what appears to be a consistent psychological profile. I lean forward. What profile? She hesitates, professional detachment wavering for just a moment. Extreme risk-taking behavior, persistent paranoia, a documented inability to form long-term emotional connections. Each generation seems to unconsciously recreate traumatic family dynamics. My grandfather Magnus, my father Nathaniel, their lives were a series of broken relationships, isolated existences, careers marked by sudden, inexplicable failures. And me, I'd fought against that pattern, married Lilith, built a stable life. Or so I thought. There's something else. Dr. Rice continues. We've identified a rare genetic mutation, not something that causes a specific disease, but a variation that affects neural pathways related to threat perception and stress response. She shows me a complex genetic map, chromosomal variations highlighted in clinical blue. In simplest terms, she explains, your family's brain chemistry is fundamentally different. You're neurologically primed for a perpetual state of threat detection. Imagine living with the constant sensation that something terrible is about to happen. Every single moment. I know that feeling intimately. Lilith is 8.5 months pregnant now. The baby could come any day. And all I can think about is the pattern, the curse, the genetic inheritance that seems to hunt my family like a predator. That night, I dream, not of monsters or supernatural entities, but of a simple, terrifying what if the real horror is inside us, coded into our very DNA? What if our child is already marked? The contractions started at 3:17 a.m. Lilith's grip on my hand was vice-like, her breathing controlled despite the pain. The hospital room felt smaller with each passing minute, the white walls seeming to close in. Dr. Rice was there. Not our usual obstetrician, but the geneticist who had been studying our case. Her presence felt deliberate, calculated. Everything is progressing normally, she said, the same phrase she used before. But nothing about our family had ever been normal. Hours passed. The rhythmic beep of monitors, the soft rustle of medical equipment. My mind kept circling back to the research, the genetic markers, the documented family history of destruction. At 11:42 a.m., our son was born. A healthy cry pierced the sterile hospital air. Normal. Perfectly, wonderfully normal. Dr. Rice ran her standard tests, blood work, genetic screening. I watched, my entire body tense, waiting for some sign of the curse that had haunted my family for generations. Nothing. Weeks turned into months. Our son, Gabriel, grew strong, healthy. No signs of the psychological fractures that had destroyed my father, my grandfather, our ancestors. No mysterious disappearances, no unexplained tragedies. I submitted every piece of medical documentation to Dr. Rice, comprehensive reports, psychological evaluations, each document a testament to Gabriel's complete normalcy. The genetic markers, I asked her during one of our final consultations, the predisposition to self-destruction. She looked tired, professional. Sometimes, she said, breaking the cycle is possible, not through supernatural intervention, but through understanding, through choice. Lilith found me one night, surrounded by the old family documents, the genealogy book, the newspaper clippings, the medical records that had consumed me for so long. Are you ready? She asked. I understood what she meant. That night, I built a fire in our backyard, watched the papers curl and burn, the history of destruction, the weight of inherited trauma, turning to ash. Gabriel played nearby, laughing, innocent. unaware of the darkness I was burning away. For the first time in generations, a pierced male would live, truly live. The curse was over. Something is always peeking at me in the Amazon warehouse. I never expected to get a job at an Amazon warehouse during the holidays. I wasn't even looking for work, but after being short of gift money and hearing a friend talk about the decent pay, I figured it wouldn't hurt to give it a shot. They needed seasonal help, and my application was accepted almost immediately. It didn't take long to adjust to the routine. Pick the items, scan them, package them, and repeat. Simple enough, but something about that warehouse. It was more than just the constant hum of machinery or the dry, sterile cardboard box smelling air that made the place feel off. It was the way the lights flickered in certain parts of the building, like they were struggling to stay on, and the eerie, echoing silence when you ventured too far down the aisles. It was never fully quiet, but the hum seemed to settle into a sort of muffled thrum when you were working in the farthest reaches of the rows of shelves. I was working the 3 to 11 shift, the shift that ensures you have no life, and you're running on fumes by the end. My days blurred together. There was no time for much else but the work and the rush of getting orders out before the end of the shift. On the first night, I noticed something odd. I was walking down an aisle, pushing my cart filled with picked orders, when I thought I saw a movement from the corner of my eye. A figure, barely there, retreating behind one of the towering stacks of packages. At first, I chalked it up to fatigue. You get tired after hours of the same monotonous tasks, and the lights in the warehouse did their part to distort things in the periphery. But the next time I was down that aisle, I saw it again. A figure, just out of sight, peeking around the corner of a shelf. I couldn't make out details, but it was too deliberate, too calculated, almost like it was waiting for me to come down the aisle, only to dart back just out of view. Probably just another worker, I muttered to myself. Get a grip. But as the days went by, it became harder to shake the feeling that something was following me. It wasn't just the quick glimpses of movement anymore. It was the odd, uncomfortable sensation that I was being watched. I turned corners, and for a split second, I catch a shadow peeking around the edge of the shelving units, as if it were waiting for me to come closer. The moments were brief, but they were enough to make me question myself. Was it my mind playing tricks, or was I really being watched? The warehouse was massive, and was probably 100 other workers. At first, I thought it might be one of my coworkers, playing some sort of prank. There was a sort of camaraderie that came with the hours we worked, the jokes we shared, and the occasional quiet moments between picking orders. But the people I worked with didn't strike me as the type for childish games. Besides, why would they target me? I decided to confront it. The next time I spotted the shadow, I didn't look away. I didn't pretend I hadn't seen it. Instead, I walked directly toward the spot where the figure had ducked behind a shelf. I rounded the corner with a firm step, expecting to catch someone in the act. But when I looked, the aisle was empty. I frowned. My heart pounded in my chest. As I looked at the empty spot, I heard a small skittering. The next time I spotted the shadow, I didn't look away. I didn't pretend I hadn't seen it. Instead, I walked directly toward the spot where the figure had ducked behind a shelf. I rounded the corner with a firm step, expecting to catch someone in the act. But when I looked, the aisle was empty. I frowned. My heart pounded in my chest. As I looked at the empty spot, I heard a small skittering behind me, almost like the patter of mouse feet. When I turned around, I caught the very edge of the figure again, ducking behind a shelf. For the rest of that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. No matter how I tried to focus on the work, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder. Every time I walked down an aisle, I half expected to see someone peeking from the end, waiting, watching. But it never happened again, at least not in the open. It always happened just on the edge of my vision, almost like whatever it was adjusting their pace to match mine, to always stay in my peripheral vision. It was subtle, a soft scrape of feet against the concrete floors, just beyond where I could see. Sometimes I'd hear breathing, shallow and almost labored, coming from the darkened aisles. I'd stop. I'd listen. The noise would always stop the moment I did, as if it were waiting for me to continue moving forward. By the end of my first week, I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was in that warehouse with me. The feeling of being followed became unbearable. My mind was on edge. My nerves shot from hours of creeping unease. I'd hear the shuffle of feet behind me, but I'd turn, and no one would be there. I'd catch glimpses of movement, someone darting behind a corner, or a flicker of shadow in a dimly lit aisle. I tried telling my manager. His response was dismissive. It's just the shift hours getting to you. The building's huge. You're just working yourself up. But as the days turned into weeks, it only got worse. The strange occurrences intensified. The peeking stopped being subtle. One night, I was deep in the warehouse, near the back row of shelves, when I saw something, or someone, standing at the far end, clearly visible now. The figure was taller than any worker I had seen, with a pale face peering out from behind a shelf. I could see its eyes, wide and glassy, staring directly at me. I froze. I couldn't move. My body wouldn't respond. It was like the figure was pulling me toward it, like it had a gravitational pull I couldn't escape. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The figure wasn't there anymore. No sound, no movement, just silence. I should have run, but I couldn't make my legs move. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the sweat collecting on my back. I walked away slowly, not looking back, knowing that whatever I had seen was not something I was meant to confront. The next morning, I tried to shake it off, but it was impossible. I was rattled, to the point where I could barely focus on the work. I kept thinking of the eyes staring at me in the dark, the unnatural stillness in the aisle. That was the moment I realized I wasn't imagining it anymore. Something was there. And it wasn't just watching me, it was stalking me. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I quit. My manager asked me if I would be willing to work one more shift, Saturday night, before I left. He had always been cool, so out of guilt, I agreed. As I trudged back into the warehouse that night, I could feel the weight of something far heavier than exhaustion. There was a quiet dread gnawing at the back of my mind, a feeling that this place didn't want me here anymore. Still, I pushed it down. I could handle it. At least, that's what I told myself. The shift started uneventfully. The constant drone of forklifts and the soft hum of the overhead lights mingling together like white noise. My pick list was unusually light that night, mostly small orders that didn't take long to grab. Most of the other workers were scattered across the warehouse, their figures moving like shadows between towering shelves and aisles. The place felt emptier tonight than it had before. Quiet. I had to pick an item from the far end of the warehouse, one of the isolated aisles in the corner. The part of the warehouse far from the main foot traffic, lit only by a few weak, flickering lights. It wasn't that far from my usual routes, but the longer I worked there, the more I noticed how different this part of the warehouse felt. It was colder, darker. The air seemed heavier somehow. I took a deep breath as I wheeled my cart toward the far aisle. The lights overhead flickered, buzzing erratically before going steady again. The aisle stretched long ahead of me, stacks of boxes lining the walls. There was nothing but the sound of my shoes scraping against the concrete and the rhythmic clicking of the scanner as I went down the row, looking for the item on my list. Then I heard it, a soft skittering sound, like nails or claws scraping against the floor. I froze. My heart skipped, the hairs on the back of my neck standing at attention. It came from behind me, further down the aisle. I swung around, scanning the shadows at the far end, but saw nothing. My breath caught in my chest as I waited for another sound, but the aisle was empty. Nothing. Maybe it was just a rat, I thought. The warehouse wasn't exactly pristine, and it was filled with crates and old equipment. Animals had a way of getting in. I turned back to my task, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. But as I reached the end of the aisle, something felt off. The warehouse felt too quiet, too empty. The hairs on my arms stood up. Then the light above me flickered and died. Darkness. For a moment, I was still. My eyes adjusted to the dim glow of distant lights further down the warehouse. I turned my head, but I couldn't see anything. The entire aisle had gone dark in an instant. A low, cold dread pooled in my stomach. Before I could react, the next light down the aisle flickered off. Then another. A shadow moved toward me, blocking the light. I didn't think. I just ran, arms flailing, the cold terror gripping my chest. When I reached the end of the aisle, I turned a corner, and the footsteps stopped. Silence fell, deafening and absolute. But the air felt different. The warehouse, once so full of mechanical hums and distant voices, was now still, silent. I stood there, panting, heart racing, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. I didn't wait to find out. I bolted for the exit. I didn't stop running until I was out of the warehouse, standing on the cold concrete parking lot, gasping for air. I never went back. No more seasonal jobs. God protocol. I never should have taken the job. But when the war ended and the opportunity came to work with them, how could I resist? The world was fractured, burned, starving. The ones who controlled power and knowledge controlled survival, and they controlled both. When Aeon approached 100 scientists from different fields after the Fifth World War, we found ourselves unable to decline the opportunity. They had come knocking at our doors, and I knew who they were immediately. Over their chests, their spiral insignias marked them, symbols that carried weight far beyond mere decoration. They didn't need to wield guns or threats for people to understand their power. They wore black suits, like something pulled from those Men in Black movies from decades ago. Imposing, clean, timeless. I took the job, seeing as I didn't have any work after the war. There wasn't much work for anyone anymore. Corporations had grown larger, stronger, and normal people had shrunk, literally. The middle class was easily distinguishable now, because we looked like walking skeletons, starved half to death. The job offer felt like a gift from God, a lifeline amidst the ruin. The Aeon Research Center was buried beneath layers of reinforced steel, miles of earth, and the constant, omnipresent hum of generators. Its walls felt as though they were alive, alive with secrets, with machines, with power. The kind of people who ran Aeon operated outside of politics, wars, or even morality. They had one goal: control. It was at Aeon that we learned they had found something at the bottom of the ocean, something buried beneath the pressure of the deep, ancient darkness. And this wasn't just any discovery. This was a discovery that would shake the foundations of humanity itself. It came to us in fragments at first, large pieces of material unlike anything humans had encountered before. The kind of material that made us stop, stare, and scratch our heads in disbelief. Testing revealed it to be more durable than any known compound, impervious, even to heat, pressure, and time itself. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly, metallic sheen that refracted light in strange, almost unnatural ways. It was perfectly smooth, seemingly without flaw or imperfection. And the material was very, very, very old. But those pieces were tiny, mere fragments. The real discovery lay at the bottom of the ocean, a massive, ancient container. Pandora's box, as we had come to call it. A name far more fitting than we knew. The container was in remarkably good conditions. Not beautiful, not remarkable considering what it's withstood. Soon its very existence would be enough to send chills down our spines. It had been made from the same unearthly material as the fragments, something that defied logic and time, resisting rust, corrosion, entropy itself. When we breached the outer chamber, we found something strange. At the very bottom of the container's entryway was a familiar mark, a spiral insignia, the Aeon logo. At first, we didn't understand it. How could this be? How could a container at the bottom of the ocean, from billions of years ago, bear the Aeon insignia. Could it be a mere coincidence? How was it carved into the material? But upon closer examination, we discovered it wasn't isolated. The logo was everywhere, marking the container, its walls, and its depths. Aeon property. That phrase was written in small, cold letters at the base of the container's door. We didn't understand it then, but we would learn that this was the least important discovery we'd ever make about Pandora's box. Inside Pandora's box, we found something that sent us spiraling into madness. A message. Not just a note or a written statement, but a prophecy. A warning carved into the walls, put there by some unknown hand. And it wasn't made by Aeon, at least not the Aeon from now. It came from a different Aeon, a future Aeon. Or at least that was what the date implied at the beginning of the writing. January 1st, 2120. 12 months into the future. It was like something you'd read on conspiracy forums on some corner of the internet. The writing on the walls quickly painted a grim image. In the future, Earth had been pushed far past the point of flexibility, the natural boundaries of life and time. Soon, all life would cease. The planet would no longer be able to sustain humanity, nor its counterparts in the natural world. And when that time came, we would have one solution, one singular, unalterable course of action. We had to send back living organic molecules to 3.8 billion years ago. The writings explained that natural processes had never created organic molecules in Earth's oceans. No natural synthesis had spurred the origin of life. Instead, this very container, the Pandora's box, had held them. These organic molecules, embedded in the deepest recesses of the Earth's origin, would seed life itself. Through this box, they would ensure the origin of the first organic molecules, a calculated intervention from the future. That's why this box was at the bottom of the ocean, because it was on Earth when all there was had been ocean. This Earth was the beginning of life on Earth. We struggled with this message. We questioned whether this could even be real. Was this some kind of elaborate hoax? Yet the evidence was undeniable. Scientists became sick as they pored over the text, reading it again and again. Many shut down entirely, physically, mentally, unable to cope with the implications. They fell into a catatonic state. By the time things settled down, there couldn't have been more than 20 of us. The writings continued, dark and ominous. The box's programming was simple and specific. It would send the organic molecules back to 3.8 billion years ago, to the beginning of life itself. And now it was our turn. To make sure that humanity wasn't wiped from time completely, we had to take the same measures. The message explained that activating the box would ensure our survival, but at the cost of our present existence. The entire Earth would be erased, wiped out in an instant when Pandora's box exerts an overwhelming amount of energy. We would feel nothing. No, nothing. Not even a moment of pain. It would simply happen. A finality so absolute that it would feel like waking from a dream. The final line of the text haunted me. It was signed. My name. My name. I felt my stomach twist. Somehow, me or a version of me had helped to make this thing. We held a dozen meetings that same week, deliberating over the implications of what we had found. Questions consumed us. Could we believe the writings? Could we trust this message? What would happen if we followed the instructions? Would Earth simply vanish? And if we didn't? If we chose to ignore the message, would humanity be wiped from reality? A blank void in time, erased entirely. We voted, high-ranking members of Aeon and the remaining scientists. The vote was close, minus 51 to 49. The decision was to proceed with God protocol. Those who opposed the decision began to leave, terrified of what this meant. We called it God protocol, ensuring the preservation of mankind. Or that's what we told ourselves to cope. The writings in Pandora's box stipulated that the activation should happen on the date mentioned, January 1st, 2120. Now, there is 1 month left. I find myself lying awake at night, wondering if I could change this, if there is some other way. What if we weren't meant to exist? What if this was never supposed to happen? Questions keep me up at night. What happens if I follow this protocol, knowing that another me will repeat the same actions again and again? Will we become trapped in this cycle forever? I can't stop asking. And yet, what choice do I have? Time feels short. My mind feels fractured. My body feels as if it is coming apart under the weight of this discovery. I know how much time I have left. And I know this. When I push the button, the earth will end. When you gaze into the abyssal zone, you wake up and you know it's the end. But you've trained for this and you're ready. As ready as anyone can be anyway. We've woken you up just in time to put you back to sleep. When you open your eyes and see me lying on the gurney across from you, it's supposed to get you thinking about the things you aren't supposed to think about. When you see the steel sphere between us at our feet and realize what it does, it's supposed to help bring those secrets closer to the surface. We both have oxygen masks on, IV drips in, and various tubes and needles nearby that they'll poke and prod us with if we're under too long. Our heads have been shaved, and a dozen small nodes are attached. I've only lost a month's worth of hair. I'm sure you've lost more. I wonder if that ever bothers the people we bring into this place, or if the mind doesn't make time for vanity in the face of death. We're preparing for a long trip together. Neither of us tries to speak. Oxygen masks aside, we're about to have our own private conversation. But my eyes tell you that this is the end, and your glare reminds me that you'll do everything you can to take me down with you. The people in the lab coats, scientists or doctors or spies, whatever they are, start counting down from 60 seconds. The lights on the bathysphere machine at our feet start flashing red, and although I've done this before, many times, my heart still speeds up. Someone touches my earpiece and reminds me of my name, and I hold on to it as they turn on the sedative, flooding my mask. I look over just as your eyes are closing. Together, as the countdown hits 10 seconds, we descend. When I wake up on the other side, it takes time to adjust. Every few seconds in my earpiece I hear you've entered the sunlight zone. Your name is Edgar Morris, and it keeps going until I buzz in and say acknowledged. Zone 1 is recent memories. It's what happened to the target just before they were caught, and the things on their mind. It's like a dream but more focused. I see the target clearer now. A woman with long dark hair, the way it must have been before they caught her, and hazel eyes now, like mine. I think they'd been green before, but I push that thought to the side and focus on the mission. If they were green before then, I'll need every ounce of focus. We're in the woods, but not any forest I recognize. It's all pine near our base, at the few forests that remain anyway. But she'd been snatched somewhere tropical. Glossy leaves and flowers, and the memory of the sun beating down hard surround us. Panic and sweat and adrenaline overshadow everything. She knows they're going to get her, that we're going to get her. She's not as scared as they usually are, but the fear is still there. I get just the big picture of her thoughts. She's worried about her cat of all things. Hidden in her mind are potentially world-ending secrets, lives ending in the most gruesome ways, and governments falling or rising depending on what she has. And that's what she's thinking about. Her fucking cat. I reach out, trying to probe further as I walk closer to her in the dreamscape. I try to feel for thoughts of children, parents, lovers, but there's nothing. Perhaps that's why she wasn't as scared as the others. She didn't have anyone she could take down with her. No one she loved anyway. The forest around us shifted if I looked at it too long. Ferns turned to wildflowers. Fronds turned to pine needles. I refocused, keeping my memories out as best as possible. I zeroed in on the heat and the bugs, trying to immerse in her world. She's not running in the dreamscape, but she is out of breath, sort of in limbo, standing but looking confused. I stay near her, taking in everything I can, but nothing I'm not supposed to. I see hints of a building or structure in the distance, but that's not for my eyes. When I feel like I've seen and felt everything useful on the surface, I get closer to her and she senses me. She turns around slowly, but by the time she sees me, my hand is on her shoulder, and we're descending once again. Each level is more disorienting than the last, as the pressure builds. I hear several repeats of "You've entered the Twilight Zone. Your name is Edgar Morris," before I get my bearings enough to radio back and acknowledge. Like its namesake, the drop-off into the next zone is sharp. Things are quick to become more emotional and abstract. Vision and hearing stay mostly intact, but other senses start to blur. I'm in her domain now, whoever she is. I hear the sound of children playing, and I feel carefree in a way I haven't in decades. She's brought me far into the past. That's become the common practice. Think about safe memories, what you were doing when you were too young to have important secrets, and maybe even win some measure of sympathy from your captors. But that wouldn't work, not with us. Not at this level anyway. I think back to who I know that has green eyes and pale skin, but stop myself. Any distractions could mean death. She's brought me to a birthday party. We're outside somewhere hot, but I can't be sure if it's the same climate as the one she was caught in. I see her running across the lawn, aged 6 or 7, with a group of other children. Her hair was lighter then, but I know it's her instantly because no one else ever feels quite real down here but the target. A little boy a few years younger than her trails beside her. He's calling for her to slow down. He's calling her Dottie. That's her name then, Dottie. If we didn't already know that, we got it now. I make sure to take in everything around me, as the boys upstairs will be watching too. I'd watched back my first mission years ago. The scanners filled in the gaps. They added logic where there wasn't. The hills behind the house shifted if I looked at them too long, growing taller or shorter, but played back they'd be static. Faces, unless they were ones she remembered well, would be filled in with approximations. I left Dottie alone, taking in as much intel as I could on what I was up. The grassy lawn, the blades shifting like the ocean if I looked too closely, and zoomed in on the other faces of people she might be close to. I walked up to different adults and glanced at them, but they ignored me, their faces bare of any features. There were only 2 adults whose faces Dottie seemed to remember clearly, and I made sure to get good shots for the boy's topside. The man had the same hazel eyes as Dottie, and I figured we likely had her parents. Her mother had the same short, sort of choppy hairstyle as my mother had worn when I was a child, so Dottie was likely the same age as me. I pushed that thought to the side when her mother's hair started turning blonde like mine. I needed to focus. There didn't seem to be much that Dottie recalled apart from her family. I caught up with her at a picnic table singing happy birthday to a little girl whose face she didn't really remember, and I watched the little girl blow out her candles with a mouth that only appeared when she opened it. Her eyes were mere suggestions on a tan slab. I'd seen everything of value here. It was time to move on, either by my hand or hers. I'd gotten close enough that Dottie was watching me, her party hat falling off her small head. I wondered if she'd acclimated yet. I quickly had my answer. The scene change was instantaneous, but not disorienting. We were still at twilight. Suddenly, we were in a hallway of a school, and she was a few years older. She was trying to blend in with the crowd, but it didn't work because she didn't remember any of their faces. I picked her out right away. I chased after her, eventually passing a teacher whose face she remembered clearly, an old woman. I slowed down just enough to send a clear picture of the woman's face topside. I got closer and suddenly we were camping, somewhere with snow this time. I forced my mind blank, the familiarity immediately trying to bring up my own memories of childhood romps in the snow. There were pine trees here, and I saw them clearer than the other forest we'd been to, but likely only because I was filling in the gaps with my own memories. We started torturing our own people just to torture the enemy. In a way, things went back to the time before the bathyspheres, when information was extracted with pain. Those without particularly harsh and disturbing memories were punished the most, so they wouldn't be helpless in the face of capture. We called it enhanced defense training. The practice became the ultimate equalizer. It made us all the same amount of fucked up. Our methods were much lighter than what the enemy would do to our people if they caught us, of course. But those tasked with doling out defense training were always quick to remind recruits that their methods had been modeled after their enemies. This had all been a bit after my time. I had plenty to defend myself with already. But apparently, Dottie hadn't. The first time I entered a target, their emotions were overwhelming, all-encompassing. It made me realize that everyone feels things differently, and that I felt less than most. The small glimpses I'd gotten into others' lives, and their feelings, had helped me acclimate a little bit more each time. But it was never easy. At this level, I'm almost completely tuned into Dottie now, and the fear is overwhelming. She's brought me here so quickly. She could have stalled more in the Twilight Zone. She could have made a few small sacrifices in the Midnight Zone to buy herself more time. But she didn't. She knew that her secrets would be well protected with whatever she had in store for me here, in the Abyss. At this stage, I was completely immersed in her memory. I was merely a passenger, going along for whatever ride she was going to take me on. When I opened my eyes, I was strapped to a table, and Dottie was strapped to the table next to me. I suppose that's fitting. It didn't seem like it would be that different from our defense training. Though I'd never been on the receiving end, I'd taught many lessons. When they started shocking us, I was ready. As ready as anyone can be anyway. There are only so many ways you can hurt someone without damaging them. I was intimately familiar with all of them. From our experiments on test subjects, we realized that 4 hours of enhanced defense training was what most people could handle. That would help run the clock out on the bathysphere, with the added chance that whoever was diving into your mind would leave early if they couldn't handle the pain. They'd put a clock in the bare concrete room where they did their training. It was the only other thing in the room besides the table Dottie was on, and the small table next to it full of various tools. I could make it 4 hours. In the Abyss, you're almost like a ghost. You get dragged along with the target's memories, and whatever happened to them happens to you right alongside them. Sometimes you see yourself as them. Sometimes you're beside them, while everything happening to them is duplicated for you. It's like you're having double vision. When we hit 6 hours, I realized something was very wrong, that perhaps they'd crossed lines we hadn't. The possibility had been discussed, of course. Hit 48 hours, and you'd be invincible. Enemy agents wouldn't have time to get to the trenches, get the information they needed, and decompress on the way to the surface. We'd tried it, of course, but the few unlucky test subjects had been entirely useless when we were done. They were beating us when I heard Edgar Morris. Your time is up. Resurface now, or continue the mission. The choice is yours. I can't press my earbud, but that's really only to help ground me anyway. The boys upstairs can see and hear everything. I say through the blood pooling in my mouth, acknowledged. I'm going to the trenches. Whatever secrets Dottie has that would be important enough to warrant protection as drastic as this, meant that time was of the essence. What she had could mean life or death for everyone and everything on the planet. I had to try. The boys upstairs did not radio back. Focus was critical. Knowing I had an end time helped. They wouldn't keep going past 48 hours. There would be no point. I was dead anyway. Every few hours, the torturers swapped out. I learned that even I did not know all of the ways you can hurt someone without permanently damaging them. I kept telling myself world-ending secrets, governments rising and falling, and lives ending in the most gruesome ways. I told myself it might be completely up to me to save the world. I also took a great deal of satisfaction in the fact that I screamed less than Dottie did. When it was over, the room vanished, and we descended together. You've entered the Haddle Zone. Your name was Edgar Morris. Thank you for your service. The loop kept playing as Dottie and I acclimated to our descent. I don't know how long it was before I radioed back, acknowledge. But time didn't matter anymore. This was the end. It's just us now. No distractions, no more defenses save for the most important one. We're truly tied together here. Dottie's inside my head now, just like I'm inside hers. It's the most intimate bond either of us will ever share. When we come to, we're lying close together, my arm under her back, her hair sprawled out over my chest, like some sick parody of intimacy. Though we're on opposite sides, I respect her dedication. I've always felt more of a camaraderie with my fellow agents than with the people who pulled the strings on either side. I decide we have time to let her say her last words, while I gather the strength to do what needs to be done. Finally, I ask her, "What the fuck do you have that's worth all that?" She replied simply, "I don't know." I lead us into the conversation that we've both certainly had with other people countless times before. How can you side with them after what they've done? She moves away from me, finding the strength to get up at last. In the midnight zone, the man you saw, Luke, she smiles. You didn't get anything useful there. He's already dead. She starts looking around us, taking in the trench, looking for weapons, but only out of obligation to try. She knows it's over. I loved him. I know we're not supposed to. I feel her anger, her rage now as if it were my own. That was nothing compared to what your people did to him. The idea was simple and had been brought about by the generation before us. Anyone willing to possess or extract potentially world-ending secrets should have to get literal blood on their hands. The tradition came from an old idea at the very start of the nuclear age, an idea that was never implemented but might have saved countless lives. The idea was that potentially apocalyptic nuclear codes should be tattooed on the inside of someone's ribcage, and if whoever was in charge wanted to access them, they had to carve open their chest. They had to understand the cost of what they were doing. For decades now, both sides have been sending back bodies with the hearts carved out. It was an honorable death, and it reminded us all what was at stake. It wasn't always possible in the dreamscape. Not everyone had the right tools. But I was lucky, I guess. The slate that jutted out at the edge of my creek came out in big chunks when I needed it. It snapped jagged and rough, and though it might break, I could always snap off another piece to finish the job. Back in the real world, I'd used the slate to scrape off the skin of a soldier who'd done the same to my mother. It was an honorable weapon because it cut me too when I wielded it. As I held Dottie down, she tried to reason with me, to tell me that I didn't know what was at stake, but I didn't listen. Her emotions were taking me over, and I wanted to believe her so badly, but I managed to hold on to what little of myself still remained. I gave Dottie a proper send-off, an agent's death. I considered killing more honorable in the dreamscape because I felt it with her as I carved out her heart. I only had a few minutes after she died, but for those few minutes we were truly merged. I could see everything, all of her memories, her thoughts, and her feelings were mine. For the first time in my life, I felt the full spectrum of human emotion, and it was glorious and horrible at the same time. I knew what we needed instantly. It was a string of 12 numbers. I radioed in to send it topside, then said, "This is Edgar Morris. It's been an honor." I set Dottie's heart next to me on the forest floor. I watched the creek wash away the blood dripping from her body, but I didn't put my hands in. It was important to remember what was at stake. I wanted the boys upstairs to see it too, for as long as they could. My quiet, cold, lovely forest got louder as more birds and bugs took over. The snow melted and the wind slowed. The sun banished the last of the cold, and I watched plants with glossy leaves grow over the bed of needles. This was her revenge, total decompression sickness. Her body would die now, but her mind was overriding mine. I wondered how long they'd keep my body alive for. They could send other agents into midnight with more than enough time to get back. They could find every face she'd ever seen. I tried to hold on to my mother's face, how it had been in life, of course, not the gruesome sight it had been after her death. But it slipped away, replaced by Dottie's mother. All of the things that had made me myself melted away, and I felt okay with that. I looked at my hands now, and they were almost as gory as they'd been when I'd held Luke's body. The boys topside could see when the end was near, and they radioed down, "Thank you, Edgar Morris. You've done the right thing." God, I hope so. World-ending secrets, governments rising and falling, lives ending in the most gruesome ways. As Dottie's mind erased mine, I picked up her heart and held it to my chest. I know this is the end, but I trained for it, and I'm ready. As ready as anyone can be anyway.